Okay, I'm starting my recording. It's going. Okay, you guys. So yeah, happy Saturday and welcome to the Regenerative Neighborhood Framework calls. We're gathering here to discuss the topics important in ideating, planning, designing, building, and operating a regenerative neighborhood. I'm sharing my screen right now for everyone that's going to be watching the call. Everyone that's on the call right now, feel free to jump onto the Miro board. The link is on the website, and we'll share the link in a second here in the chat. But this is the Miro board, so you can see it. It's like an infinite white erase board. And starting up here, you can see the big why of this call series. We figured that the world would be better off with more regenerative practices, regenerative society, regenerative neighborhoods. And so we are working on gathering resources and exploring the important topics that we've outlined. These are the 5 topics here: ecology, hardware, human systems, software, and economy. And so discussing these macro topics and subtopics within to bring to the surface all of the important things that we feel need to be considered for designing and building and operating regenerative neighborhoods. Every week so far, we've been going through each one of these topics. We do 2 weeks per topic. So we did ecology for 2 weeks, then we did hardware for 2 weeks, human systems for 2 weeks, and now we're on economy. We're kicking off these economy calls. I'll give you a little peek at what we will be discussing today. These are the categories we've come to so far, by no means finished. We'll discuss what else economy could contain. It's things like currency and value exchange, financial management, economy and trade, investment models, ownership models, and land purchase. So we'll be discussing those a little bit more later in the call. To kick off, we're going to do a round of intros with everybody. Let me stop sharing my screen here.
I'm waiting to be let in.
Yeah, Sonia's waiting to be let in. Thank you for the heads up. Yeah, what's up, you guys? Welcome, welcome. Nice to see familiar faces. A lot of us coming back for many of these calls. Jake, welcome, new face. I would love to get a short intro of you. We're going to do some breakout groups. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 of us. I'm going to do 3 breakout groups. I think that should be good for now. So everyone can chat and get to know each other a little more. Give me 1 second here. So, right. All right, everyone jump in. We're going to do about 3 minutes in the, wait, hold on. Actually, let me let a few more people in that are waiting to get in. Okay, cool. Okay, nice, you guys. So welcome. We've done the intro to the board already. We're going to go into breakout groups for about 5 minutes. So I'm going to do 4 breakout groups now. There's more of us. Everyone get an intro of each other, update each other on what you're working on right now, what you're excited about this call. Economy, is there anything on your mind? If anything comes to mind, go ahead and add that to the Miro board, as we'll be discussing some of these topics as the call continues. All right, so I'm pushing the breakout groups. If you're in a group with just bots, feel free to jump out and jump into a new one. Okay, so what? Just I'm in this group. Jake Brandling, I'm going to go to his. I'm going to group 3.
Hello, Manuel. I see you here, but I'm not sure if you're present with me. Manuel, are you here? Thomas, hello.
Yeah, hello. There was nobody in my meeting, in my room, in room 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that. Manuel is here as well, but I'm not really sure if Manuel can hear us. Well, I hope you do, Manuel. How are you doing, Thomas?
I'm okay, thanks. I just had COVID in you.
What about COVID?
No, I had COVID. I'm
Oh,
recovering
okay.
from COVID.
Okay. Yeah, how's that going? How's the recovery journey going?
Yeah, it is good, slowly but steadily.
Okay, yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, it's the time of the year. A lot of my friends in Europe are getting flus and colds because it's yeah, it's so kind of cold.
Yes.
Mm. Yeah, I'm really good. I'm it's hot in here the last couple of days, and also we've had some shortages of power, so I feel like a little bit disconnected from the digital space, unfortunately. I'm really happy, just indulging in
Mm.
more online activities. There's some friends here that are staying in a house nearby, so we're meeting with them quite frequently. We just started making our own yogurt. So just, slow living activities.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and I
mhm.
prepared some slides. I can present potentialism today if you would like to
I think
know about it.
next week will be the solutions week. So I think probably the presentation will be better then. But
Okay.
if today is the only day that you can present, then we can definitely make space for that. I think the first call for each of the main categories is just more theoretical. Okay, what do we think about that topic? And just more philosophical conversations versus the second one is more connected to like solutions-based conversations. So I think potentialism
Yeah.
um, will be
Yeah.
really, really good for that. But yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for preparing that.
However, for me, it would be better to present it today. I'm not
Okay.
sure if I have so much time next week.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, let's do it today. Yeah, we
Okay.
can craft. How many minutes do you need for the presentation?
Or I can accommodate nearly any time. I have materials for many hours, so it depends on how much I should cut it down. If I should just present some core principles, or how
Yeah, I
much
would
I should present.
Yeah, I think like usually the 10 minutes would be great. And then what we can do
Mm.
is because there's like one hour and a half the main call, and then we have another 1 hour that's gonna be more follow-up conversation. So
Yes.
we can just leave a broader conversation around potentialism for the other hour, and then we can
Yeah.
allocate like 15 to
Okay.
20 minutes within the 1 hour and a half block. Is that okay?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for preparing and presenting and pushing that idea forward. I saw the Instagram the other day and it's really, really good. And like
Mm.
I think the videos are well made and
Of medical vigilance.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's
Yeah.
like content that goes
Yeah.
viral.
Yeah.
You have a pretty good team of people that are creating content.
Yes. 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 Some leading Gen AI people are working on it. Yeah.
Okay,
I deliver most of the ideas, and they did with the Gen AI part.
right. Yeah, it's really good content. Yeah, and the idea is really good. I'm definitely looking forward to implementation of that system and then, a feedback loop of how it functions with smaller and bigger human organisms, meaning like societies. I'm curious to see what would be your dream scenario for potentialism. Where would you implement it as a like a pilot for further
Yeah.
implementation?
Initially, probably in DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations. That's also
Okay.
why I join teams like yours and other DAO teams. However, most of them are having difficulty because of the cryptocurrencies going down.
Right,
And
yeah.
then possibly third world countries. I'm already in contact with an association for tribal chiefs,
Mm-hmm.
chiefdoms. This is, for example, the King of Hawaii and some other
Wow. Okay.
Caribbean kings and African ones, and to get them to adopt some elements of it. That's what I'm trying to do. However, this is not so easy, and it requires the willingness to go all high technology, because then innovation would come from high technology and from being innovative.
Right. Yeah. Well, whoever is willing to adapt, like for our organization, I think we can try. We don't really have that many people right now, so I don't know how, yeah, how valuable the results would be for you, because it's mostly Oscar and myself, and we have a couple of other people that are working on projects with us. So we could try that if you're excited about that, we can talk about what that would look like. And I would say definitely like tech forward, eco villages would be a good playground for that. I mean, these people are a little bit more open to try out new things, and have something that's already thought through.
Yes, that could help. For example, on a small scale, you could just help bringing out a book on potentialism, or maybe also a book on regenerative communities or self-sufficient communities.
Mm-hmm. Hello, Vic.
Yeah, hello, Vic.
How do you feel about book reading? I'm wondering, you mentioned that the other day, and I think if somebody writes a book about something, it gives them credibility, because in order to achieve at least 150 pages of something, you need to have a pretty in-depth knowledge about that. So that's already like if I see a book about something, I'm like, oh, okay, this is written by an expert, and I think that figures in most of our heads. I think now, because writing is so easy with AI, books might lose credibility because it's easy to write and everybody can write, and also because you can just synthesize any topic in 5 minutes. And I think yeah, I wonder what
yeah, it's losing attractiveness. However, we are working on topics that were taken black, I think. So the government is not interested in self-sufficient communities, because then people pay less tax and work more on their own circular economy. And similarly, they're not interested in people knowing how to improve capitalism, because then it becomes obvious how badly they are doing, the governments, because they're not doing these things. So, and this again means, to come back, that there's no research money, because these are black topics not supported by any government. And that means that anybody who publishes or works in this field is not paid. The people like us. Sure. And that it's really for the benefit of humanity, not professors getting millions and then bringing out a book. And they can easily bring out a much better book, and then they have thousands of students buying these books. For them, it's not an economic risk. But in these, regarding these black topics in which we are working, it's far harder to bring out a good book. And if we bring out a good book, it will excel from anything else. And it's really a black topic. There's really solutions are missing. It's really a gap in science.
So Thomas, I'm super happy you're here. Right, today's topic, economy, as we were discussing. And of anyone that I know, Thomas has spent a lot of time and has prepared a lot of really good resources and a pretty solid write-up and description of an economic, socioeconomic model. You know what potentialism is. You want to do like a 1-minute elevator pitch, Thomas?
Yes, I could also present it longer. I can also give a short elevator pitch as you want.
I think we have next call planned for presentations, but I'd be happy for you to do a few minutes, maybe like a 5-minute presentation.
Yeah, plant a seed right now for the next.
Right. That would be really great. So maybe we can kick off with that. I think that would be really nice. You put a lot of time into this, Thomas, and this is what the group is about: bringing together solutions and topics that will spark conversations. You want to prepare for a few minutes? You want to do it now?
I think maybe let's allocate 10-15 minutes at the end of the 1.5 hour block, after we're a little bit warmed up around the topic of economy. And then if there's a lot of energy around that,
okay.
Yeah, that might work well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, in a sentence, Thomas, potentialism, describe it.
Yeah, it's a maximally ethical socio-economic model. That's another version of our current capitalism, an improved version. And that optimizes for optimal outcomes. Is the key element is paid along the net benefit value that they produce. And that corruption is minimized.
Right. So I've looked through a lot of it. I've actually been using Thomas's documentation and using summaries of it to blend with the current framework that we have and to see how someone's input to that framework as a skeleton, what kind of product that's creating in terms of a ready-to-use governance manual, a ready-to-use constitution for a community. Because this is what I'm hoping this all will result in. Us providing enough data to create a good skeleton, and then using that skeleton with someone's idea to create the plan for a community. Right? This is kind of the chain that I'm imagining in my mind of this tool and what it could become. And so, Thomas, thank you for providing what you've provided. We'll go into it a little more in detail after we do the session.
Okay.
So
at
welcome
the end
all.
of the first 1.5 hours, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right after that. That's the time we have allotted. Thanks to Vic, we've structured the call in a more doing the from 3 to 4:30 like we always had scheduled, the resource gathering, bringing up the topic with a few kind of guided questions as a collective experience. And then from 4:30 to 5:30, we're going to do this open space. So now that all the topics are alive, we're going to be, Vic, maybe you can help with this journey. We have a space. I'm sharing my screen here. To the left, that same open space technology area that you made. Maybe as topics get really exciting as we go through the call for the first hour, we can add topics to the raw topic section. And then that can become the framework or the pool of topics for the open space at the end of the call. And we'll go more into details there. Okay, cool. So everyone kind of chatted with each other. I share a reminder. This is a screen of what the economy category, kind of the subtopics we've created so far. I don't know why my photo is on this one. It's like a weird bug from the platform because this is a link to the investment models group. But so these are the groups we have in the Tribes platform. Topics that between Chimera and Masterminding Eden and topics that we've come to on our own have identified as describing major components of the economy. Our first activity is we're going to ask, what is economy to you? I invite everyone to this part of the board. If you can see my screen, if you're on the, I'm going to do one, bring everyone to me so you all see where we're at. And so in these first, I want this to be like add cards, but this is a conversation portion where what is economy to you? I'm going to phrase that question. I'm going to put a few minutes on this timer and let's discuss this as we bring up topics and create kind of a topic queue that we will go into more. Feel free to write anything or share anything vocally as I start this timer. If you have something you're passionate about, share a card and start talking about it by all means. I'm letting some people into the call. Okay. Earth Change Vending Machine, welcome. We're currently on the Miro board. Yeah. We're currently on the Miro board. Let me share a link to it. Thank you, Justin, for sharing that. We're on this part of the board. We're discussing economy. In addition to these core components that we've outlined, which are currency and value exchange, financial management, economy and trade, investment models, ownership models, and land purchase. What else is economy to you in terms of a regenerative neighborhood? The short description we have based on the context we've given Our LLM is economy designs regenerative value flows with local currencies, investment models, ownership structures, and trade systems that prioritize shared prosperity and resource sovereignty.
I have been accused of being a Marxist in the past.
Okay.
Prefacing that, I think there's I think we need to, I think there's an importance to bring attention to labor.
Mm-hmm.
And as an architect, as you all know, there's the tendency towards automation and panelizing and robot, like in the history of the Industrial Revolution, what comes from all of this advanced technology is fewer jobs. And there is
Fewer jobs, you said.
fewer jobs,
Fewer jobs, yeah.
fewer meaningful jobs.
Sure.
And so I think labor, I think, is really an important part to have meaningful work within a community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Do you consider yourself
To
Marxist?
that, Carl, is that labor is about to change dramatically. The cost of labor is probably $10 an hour this year, $1 an hour in 2035, and 10 cents an hour in 2045.
Right.
Just looking at AI and robotics. And the question is, we've got a 2 orders of magnitude deflation in labor, will labor become a commodity and maybe a universal basic service?
A basic service, basic living wage or living salary.
Universal basic services provide residents with a share of renewable energy, a share of food, and a share of labor.
That's a that would be a way to compared to the last 200 years would be the potential of that. I appreciate, but yes, that would be a good direction with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful to be forward looking a little bit.
When you say a share of labor,
Yeah.
what does that mean?
Well, I think it means you get a certain number of hours of time on frontier models, so you can actually work on thinking through so artificial labor, everything you do behind a screen.
Okay. So artificial labor. Interesting.
And
so you got like a robot for 5 hours a week or something.
Right, robot for 5 hours. No, it would be a robot, right? Right
Yeah,
now
sure.
they're $20,000, but look, we're looking at buying, like right now we're releasing a full self-driving vehicle.
Yeah.
And we're looking at placing such a vehicle in service, think of it like a cyber cab or a robotaxi, for a regenerative community. Because right now we go to our regenerative communities and there's 20, 30 cars there just sitting there not being used.
Right.
And it's a huge cost. And if instead a lot of our regenerative community members just have access to a community vehicle that might be self-driving, it might be something else, and they can go into town and get some groceries, they can pick up somebody from a train station. There's all sorts of things that can be done as part of the community, and you don't need to own a car anymore.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of
universal basic services.
Universal basic services, as opposed to, if you give people money, it's just inflationary. But if you say, look, every resident's got a right to a certain amount of renewable energy, a certain amount of food security, and a certain amount of labor, and that may vary somewhat from community to community, but it provides a foundation, if you will, a safety net, that if you're a resident of this community, you could get these what they call stellar output rights,
right?
A shared portion. Now that's some of it. There'll be other things that are scarcer, but hopefully energy, food, and labor will be abundant enough that we don't have to meter it so much.
Yeah, it's coming for sure with labor, right? It's just a matter of energy is going to be the bottleneck for sure. I see why that is. I see that more and more now. Okay, cool. So a few answers on what is economy to you? Anyone have anything they're very excited to share that like maybe is missed on these topics that they feel is like really critical to talk about? And remember, writing it and talking about it are both important, because I'm using the transcripts to feed the LLM, and I can see how it alters the the feedback the LLM is giving me when I add new transcripts. So I want this to be really chatty. Make sure you bring up topics you're passionate about, you guys.
I'm a big fan of the concept of the gifting economy that was presented in Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics. I mean, it didn't necessarily coin the term, but when it comes to UBI, Universal Basic Income, we've got to give big props to MLK. Martin Luther King had a lot to say about that. I don't really think that.
Okay, so that is a topic. You want to bring forth that the gifting economy should definitely be considered as a topic within this topic. Okay, cool.
And peer-to-peer exchange, like the digital markets, I think there should be a recognizable difference between peer-to-peer in the original sense compared to CBDCs, central bank currencies, digital currencies.
Sure, middleman governing exchange.
Yeah. So
controlling the medium of exchange, sure.
Yeah. And I'm a big follower of Jack's resource-based model, resource-based economy. I feel like it's a little bit more objective. I think one thing a friend sent to me that the most two valuable things in the future are going to be high technology and art. So,
So a question to you here on this topic of resource-based economy. I've had a great conversation with Thomas in the past about how he even has a really great document on how the resource-based economy is like, not what it's really cracked up to be, right? There's still always going to be a medium of exchange. In your version of resource-based economy, what are you using as an exchange mechanism? Like, are you trading apples for chairs and things like this in that thought?
well, of your local ecologies. I mean, I really look at that in the sense of, well, medium of exchange is just an agreed method.
You're breaking up a bit. I don't know if it's me or
might be my data might be pretty low right now, but
yeah, I can't hear you if you're talking.
I just want to use the right terms, and they're escaping me right now. I'm having a brain
Okay, that's
I
okay.
apologize. This is, but
okay, that's okay. Don't stress.
cool.
Think about it. Write it out. We're gonna keep going with the call. Okay, cool. Does anyone else have anything else that they're like passionate about in the economic sense? What is economy to you? Flow of energy to create harmonic balance, simplified ways to transact. Yes. Economy is a way to manage scarcity, but how does economy apply to tribes of abundance? Okay. So, as we have clearly stated in a lot of the previous calls, we're designing systemically. We're designing integrated systems that support each other and are designed to collaborate instead of compete, and with all of their winning in mind. So I want to lead to the next kind of guiding question, which is, how does economy relate to other main categories? So the other categories we've talked about so far are ecology, hardware, the built environment, human systems, right? The humans. If you shift over to the right, I'm at the next activity. I'm gonna, I think, bring you guys over here, bring everyone to me. There we go. Perfect. How does economy relate to our main categories? Yeah, we're over here. And so in the next 4 minutes, I want you guys to think about how the economy, money, exchange, value, storing, ownership, all of this has to do with the other categories, right? I think one of the main topics that's coming up as I'm processing things with the LLM is the interrelatedness of design metrics and design, what's the word? Design filters, huh?
Principles?
No. Like decision gates, like we'll do this only if it aligns with this other piece, So I'd love to leave these next 4 minutes. I'm going to set the timer. Maybe I'll do, 4 minutes is fine. How do you see economy relating with the other topics? The other topics here are ecology, hardware, human systems, and software, which we haven't gotten into yet, but we will in the following 2 weeks. I'm going to set the timer. Go ahead, you guys. Like, how does the economy relate to these other topics? If there's any topics you're excited about, feel free to start talking about it. I guess you don't have to put your hand up because I'm not looking at the Zoom, but if you have something to share in any of these, feel free. All right, about 15 seconds left. I'm going to start reading out some of the ecology things. Economy is fully embedded within ecology. If you care about sustainable economics, then you have to care about sustaining ecosystem. Perfect. The economy is based on the ecological value. Economy should be used to protect and empower ecology. All economy is a strict subset of economy. Yeah. Seems like that's like we all definitely agree with that. That the economy is based on ecology. It's the only real thing, and economy is a construct based on that. And one of my observations is people tend to forget that. And I think Kevin has said it best. Like a tree is in the way when you're thinking about a development project, but when you're thinking about survival and living, a tree is the most essential thing in the world because it creates the air we breathe. So keeping that tether is very important. Let's see, for hardware, anyone want to share something? Or zero corruption with digital product passports and UN transparency protocol. Okay, cool. Digital product passports and UN transparency protocol. Okay, I don't know who wrote that one. Would that one maybe be more for software? I don't know how that applies to hardware. Aesthetics, that's good. That's in there. IoT sensors everywhere. Hardware requires materials and energy. Yep. Economy can broker the trader of materials and energy to build and operate hardware. Yes. Economy dictates the levels of hardware that can be built. Yes. Okay, cool. For human systems, let's see. Keeping humans out of power with machine governance. Okay. Yep. Well, remember, this was relating to economy. We're seeing how economy relates to human systems. Economy accounts for contributions and consumption within human systems. Yes. The ability for individuals to exchange. Economy is used as a reward mechanic to engage individuals, makes life flow like water, removes friction, or gets in the way of life. Yeah, agreed. Okay, and then technology. Again, is everyone very quiet today? Let's see. Open automation libraries from integral parallel economy projects. Okay. Libraries from integral parallel economy projects. Who wrote this, can you elaborate a little bit on this? I'd love to visit her.
Yeah, it's me. It's from the paper by Peter Joseph. He introduced 5 components into his framework, like integral time credits and open design libraries and feedback loop and something else. So it's complex paper, referenced many times, and need to be explored more in depth.
Yeah, it would be great. So maybe a to-do there is we need to find some of these parallel economy projects. Have you shared some in the past?
Yeah, I will share once again.
Okay, that would be awesome. Yeah. If you could put those, if you're putting links, maybe you can put them there next to the side, or you can put them over here to the left in this white area. This is what we're using as kind of resource dump for everybody, in case you guys didn't know, over here on the right. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's a good one. Other technology stuff, keeping track of the economy with technology, innovation goes where the money is, quantum financial systems, open ledger, instant transactions. Okay, cool. So these are relatable things. Does anyone want to double tap on any of the ones that they put?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
It's one I've just added, and it's a quote from Buckminster Fuller. Nation states are the blood clots of civilization.
Wow.
And what that means is the inequity of economics from across a national border is profound. And we're all brothers and sisters. And, it shouldn't be so inequitable across nation states.
Right. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. The human potential is like one of the most, I think, wasted resources in the world, right? Each human has the ability to do such amazing things and create such value, but because we don't have basic things,
right,
so much of that goes underused and explored, which is such a shame. Obviously, also the suffering that the human goes through, but in some cases, it's not so much suffering; it's just a lack of creating their own life, which sucks that they're not empowered to do that.
Agreed.
Okay. So this brings me to the thought of, right. These calls we're wanting to design a framework, and sure, we're asking the LLM to help guide us on how it would do the framework based on the topics we're exploring and the topics that come up. 1 second. I'm sorry. Charger. Computer's not here. Okay. I guess a question that's in my mind is, I'm still not sure, what is the best economic model? How do you decide something that's great? Which is why I'm super impressed by your work, Thomas, and what you've put together with potentialism, where it's not just an economic model. You need to tie in the social part to it. It's critical. right? Like what you're saying also, Dr. Brian, that this inequality is, right, the blood clot of civilization. It was an economic model designed just for zeros, to accrue zeros and store wealth in certain ways. And it doesn't empower the individuals of that society.
Right.
So yeah, economic models need to be designed holistically.
Yeah, we've seen failures of capitalism and failures of communism. And I wonder if we might not design something better that includes a safety net, includes universal basic services, and it also includes enough opportunity and resources for creativity and incentives to create new things and to put effort in. And so there's a balance, and I think we've got a number of examples of things that sort of work and things that don't work. And I think our opportunity in regenerating neighborhoods is to design community scale abundance of basic services and goods, and then to enable enough resources so that people can learn on their own. I mean, education is dropping by orders of magnitude in cost. The whole notion of work is going to be redefined. And if we have that safety net for individuals and for families, then we can make it safe to be creative and to learn and to find passion in work that we want to do.
Yeah. I agree. Like, again, we'll help people just have their core needs so they can explore their higher needs and build higher value things in life and do more than just survive, which is a shame. Yeah. Okay, so I have a question here that I want to ask, which I will ask after. Okay, cool. So I'm going to slide over to the next section, which Sonia has prepared a series of questions. And so the goal in this call is to kind of get everyone's mind rolling around specific topics, around economy, of course, and to see what results from that. And then at the end of the call, we're going to have this open space time where now that all these topics have been brought to the surface, we'll have, an open room to discuss and go into subcategories and discussions and explore it more, etc. So I'm going to bring everyone's attention over here to the next box here to the right, which is under the economy section. I'm going to bring everyone's attention over here. Bring everything to me. Boom. Okay, cool. So, in this section, we're now going into the subcategories, and Sonia's prepared a few questions here for each subcategory. So, for the first subcategory of currency and value exchange, right? The question is, what constitutes wealth in a system where money isn't the only metric? And so, I think this has to do a lot with the current dominant system of capitalism where the only metric is zeros in a bank account. This starts turning that on the other side to see what else do we value. I'm going to set this for 2 minutes and go ahead and answer this question, you guys. If you guys are on the Miro board, there's like some background music playing. Let me know if it's annoying. But also feel free to share if you guys have something to share about and something comes to mind. Like this is also like general conversation time where you can bring up topics while everyone's putting their thoughts on the board, and then we can flow through the conversation, right? These next sessions will be kind of like linked question, a little bit of conversation as we roll through the following topics.
Was it 2 minutes for the first one or 2 minutes for all of them?
Just 2 minutes for the first one, and
Got
then
it.
we'll chat a little bit, and then we'll roll over to the next one if there's no like
Sure.
conversation going on. Yeah, 10 seconds left, guys. I'm gonna do something. Okay, and I'm passionate about this one. I want to talk about this one for a second. Okay, so the question was, what constitutes wealth in a system where money isn't the only metric? My first answer here that I wanted to share was happiness. Like, how do you rate happiness? I understand that's quite subjective. And so then I kind of drilled down on that and like said, what makes me happy? And it was the ability to be able to do something I imagine. So like that to me is happiness. That to me is like a level of wealth that if I put in my mind, creating something, whether it's art or a helicopter or a cupcake, I have the ability to find the information I need to do that, to get the resources that I need, and to be able to manufacture or do that thing that I want to do. I consider that to be wealth. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share?
Yeah, that kind of ties very well to what Dr. Brian said about universal basic services, which we actually called in our conversations universal basic needs. And you can do whatever you imagine if you have water, food, shelter, all the core needs met, and then tools to actually accomplish more, which is the labor that you mentioned, Dr. Brian. So I think that's a really good one.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, please keep going.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that for me, wealth would be food abundance, having abundance of food, maybe tokens that reflect the food growth in a community versus other things. Yeah, please go, Dr. Brian.
I'd like to share a small epiphany, and that is, for several years, I was feeling a tightness in my chest, and that is just, the economics of scarcity, right? Everyone's going around, they're trying to have enough. Do we have enough, right? Do we have enough energy? Do we have enough food? Do we have enough AI? All these different things. And then Stellar came along and they said, look, within 10 years, we're going to have order of magnitude reductions in solar energy and batteries in prices, order of magnitude reductions in the cost of food and the availability of food. In fact, we should be able to feed 10 billion people using 70 times less land area than we're presently using, which means we can flip all the thinking around from the scarcity mindset to abundance. And if we have extra energy, extra food, extra labor, suddenly if somebody comes along and they're traveling, a stranger comes into our midst, we've got enough to share, right? And suddenly there's an abundance mindset. There's a giving economy, as was stated by Eric. And there's this notion of generosity that comes through for at least the basic services. And I think moving towards an abundance mindset and generosity is key. And I felt that change inside my own mind. And I'm wondering, can we build communities? Like, I'm thinking of Burning Man each year because they have a giving economy there. But I'm also thinking of our Woodford Folk Festival that we're in for the last 10 years. And then the Regen communities that we're working with. And I was kind of struck, like I went down for dinner at Valbunya and, they were sharing, like we were sharing meals, people were helping with cleanup. There was a lot of participation. I'm working on energy systems for them. I just really was buoyed up by the feeling of an extended family abundance. I imagine I'd love to hear about your experience in South America, Oscar. And I kind of think we just need to build those abundant, generous. That mindset is contagious, and I would love to see us build towards that.
I guess I'd love to pick everyone's mind on like, I have my thoughts about that. I would hope that when there's so much everywhere, everyone lives in abundance. And I think that would be true. I would hope that's true. I think one of the challenges right now is that hoarding money gives power. And that is that's like the lure that even though there is abundance and even though there is, people aren't willing to just share it and put it out there because there's some, meta value to having resources. That is status, rise in the hierarchy, however you want to put that. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? On like,
Oh, Gandhi had it right. Ocean planet Earth has enough for every person's need, but not a single man's greed. And the reality is, the tyranny of autocracy, we can no longer afford that luxury. We need to be moving towards that and past a tyranny of the majority in democracy, as we've seen in the United States and elsewhere, towards consent of the governed. And that those are consent frameworks. They're better than the representative republics and arguably better than a tyranny majority. And that's really what we're talking about evolving towards, is building consent frameworks.
Right. Better mechanisms to make decisions on like the big things that actually affect everyone. Right. Like right now in the certain topic, specifically war, and
it's not okay to tyrannize 45% of the population. You just can't, that's not okay. And if you don't have a consent of the governed, the worst case is war. That's the least sustainable activity that humans could consider. And revolution is in the same category. And yet, when our systems fall apart, that's where it goes.
Totally. Yeah. Oddly.
And this all comes back to like when you have water that sits, it becomes stagnant. It's the same with money. Money is flowing in banks, right? So you get the money moving, and then there's abundance. Just like it's exponential because all that stagnant energy finally can move, right?
That's right. Money, I like to say money is like manure. To do any good, you got to move it around a lot. You got to spread it around on the style or whatever.
That's the principle of liquidity, right?
Yeah, a lot of turns. You got to keep that money moving.
When we forget, we call it currency. Currency. There's a reason for it.
And that's an argument
for being banked. The water's being banked. Right?
Yeah, if you have 2% demurrage or something, then you've got a slow exponential burn where you're incentivizing people to spend it a bit more.
Well, let me throw a wrench in the gears. What if this is all by design?
Oh, it definitely is.
Yeah, the problem is I think the Constitution was written without before there were corporations, and we've got Citizens United. Effectively the founding fathers haven't. We got to get the corporate money out of government. We see that problem in Australia. We see it in the U.S. And that corruption is just it's actually taking the government down.
Sure, right. It's the oligarchs and the feudal lords of today. And like it didn't work back then, so it doesn't work. It still doesn't work.
Intentional.
Sorry, Vic?
By the way, my book just came out and got released. It's called Taxpayers Dilemma.com.
Interesting.
It's sort of a funny term, taxpayer, because it's the big term of being taxed, right down to our souls being taxed through debt. And in my design, I'm convinced now it is fully by design. It's by
it makes sense.
Elites. So dealing with, if we just change the economy, we've got this other issue of behavior by a limited few, and we have to address it. And if anybody has any ideas on that?
Well, yeah, a fiat economy is like a fiat, like it will be done. So it's a subjective, like politically oriented economy. But to have a real free market, you'd have to have an objective accounting of resource and
objective accounting. Yeah. Agreed.
Because it's almost a political game. It's like, how do you get the right data on your resource count if there is political incentive not to have an objective accounting? And that's a pretty difficult thing. And then when you get into futures and speculations, it gets the waters get even more muddied. So like you wouldn't really be able to, there's not enough gold in the world to really account for Buckminster Fuller mentioned this. It was like all the factories that exist in the world. When you can't, you know, all the resources that we have go beyond just actual physical resources. It can go into intellectual property. It can go into technology.
Right.
And
I find that a little interesting. Like, it makes sense that more money gets printed because we inevitably discover more value in things. Like a mountain is full of a certain type of mineral, but we're not putting a price on that mountain in the economy until someone processes it and sells it as a good. So, in some sense, like the whole printing money thing makes sense because we're adding more value to the economy as time goes and as humans make up more things that are worth some dollar value. I don't know why I went on that tangent. Something you just said triggered that in me. But the topic you brought up, it brings us to the next little activity question, which is what protocols ensure transparent and resilient accounting. You just brought up that we need objective accounting, and that's super key. I totally agree with a system that counts the beans. We got to make sure all of those beans are accounted for in some way. So this next question, maybe you guys have an idea for this, because this is kind of the following train of, okay, if there is money, what are we counting with that money, and how are we keeping track of that money? It's an important question. I'd love to get your input on it. I'm going to set this timer for 2 minutes.
I think we need to distinguish between wealth and money.
Sure, agreed.
And
even go back further. What does it mean? What is an economy? What is it? Right?
Exchange of goods and services.
Well, its original definition just means management of home. How we manage
what?
Management of home. It's simple in terms of its original definition. We've created this complex quagmire that's tied together by money systems. But money actually has nothing to do with economy, except that it could be a tool for enabling the exchanges that happen in an economy. So I'm experimenting, with some language and challenging you all to, what do you think economy is? How do you guys define it?
Home economics.
How we manage our place, right? How we kind of keep things going.
The weather. I mean, if you ask any farmer, I mean, they're constantly looking at the weather patterns. If you don't have rain, you're not going to have sufficient feed to a crop. So.
Oh, but that means we got to bring the earth systems into this. Forget that.
Yeah, but you could even go into it's the story we sell ourselves.
So economy is a system, right? Economy is the system. You can consider economy to be equivalent to a container. And what is in that container labeled economy? All of the things needed to, like what you just said, Eric, track. And I would say we're tracking value, things that are valuable, things that we consume or use in any way as an individual. And so the economy is a way to put a value to that thing so that thing can be traded between others, right? Like you just said, Eric, right? To a farmer, the rain means everything. Whereas to someone else that isn't a farmer, they probably rain is not a good thing for them, in whatever specific niche. Like, let's say they do, I don't know, they host festivals. Rain is probably not your best friend when you're hosting a festival. But in the grand scheme of things, if it doesn't rain, they'll never eat because they need it for their food.
Or home building. You can't, there's certain days you can't paint if it's raining outside.
Right. You can't put concrete down if it's raining because it'll mess up the humidity. Well, so Vic, we did a little section at the beginning of what is economy to you. Does that description of like economy is this container, a system, that we use to track value and to exchange value. I would guess that would be my like. So yeah, a system to set the value of things, track that value of things, and exchange value.
The measurement of value can vary.
Sure.
But it's time, sweat equity, labor.
Track and exchange value. Yeah. Yeah. So I put it's the system to identify, track, and exchange value. That's my. Okay. So yeah, and in that question, tracking, accountability, super important. We hear in every country there's some level of corruption, in every company there's like slippage and costs, and how like accounting and tracking these things is critical in all the ways. So
equivalent exchange.
Equivalent exchange.
Energy invested to energy returned. The carrying capacity of an environment. Its limits to growth. I mean, I know I'm just throwing out these like phrases.
But sometimes you're good because they catch on the LLM, and they'll add some level of intricacy to our results. So that's cool. Okay. Okay, so any other thoughts, anyone, from like what protocols ensure transparent and resilient accounting? For me, one is like multiple layers of let's say a validation on spends. It's important. I was watching a pretty good like report on how in a country in Africa, Burkina Faso, the government quoted a road being built for $350 million, and the consultants that had quoted them through the World International Fund or whatever quoted him like $3 billion, like 100x, the or like a 10x the difference. So having different levels of, and so they tracked how those expenses happen, and it's just at different phases of middlemen, everyone is like pumping up the price by 10 to 100% to make obviously their piece on the middleman job. So maybe this also has to do with how peer-to-peer exchanging, what you were saying, Eric, can facilitate some things in that it removes a middleman and it removes a layer of obfuscation that makes money less valuable because there's just more hands on a pie. I don't know.
I mean, I just think of the libertarian arguments of a lot of people, like they say that they hold to like the philosophy of objectivism. And I find like arbitrary authorities generally map what is considered value. And that is also like the information economy and the attention economy. So,
right, the attention economy is a huge one now that like, does it get monitored in some way? I guess through dollars, or I guess through like clicks and likes, right? This is the attention economy in its like nascent form. It's likes, it's time on screen, right? It's
like
megabytes you download.
If you like another analogy would be like maybe like something to the effect of if attention was gravity, mass would be wealth accumulation. And then I think of bottlenecks.
If attention is gravity, mass is wealth because it represents its own unit that affected by gravity gives you acceleration.
Well, I think it helps to look at some pretty fundamental aspects, and one of them is that when we have plenty of goods and services, as we're anticipating, then it comes down to materials and energy pretty much And that determines the cost of things. And so there's been a suggestion that energy be a lot closer to our new tokens. There's discussion that data is the new oil. But I think we could get some guidance from Sir James Lovelock, who wrote at the tender age of 99, Novacine, in which he said the role of life in the universe is to turn sunlight into what I will call diverse information. And that applies to ecosystems and economics and even AI.
Yeah, totally right. Everything is sunlight. Otherwise, we're just a rock.
Sunlight is the energy ultimately.
Sure.
The materials came from the suns as well. But if we focus on, well, I mean, there are these fundamental costs of energy and materials, but they're not denominated in dollars, as it were. So it's an interesting different set of metrics.
Yeah.
Information's not defined in dollars.
Diverse information is the output of the sunlight. That's what life does, is turn sunlight into information. And that's what we're doing. That's what our ecosystems are doing.
Because we misuse information, right? Because information is now a multi-gazillion dollar market, according to these so-called.
When Lovelock says information, what I interpret that as diverse information, and there's assembly theory, there's Friston free energy. We're working on actually writing up. I want to have a new measure of diversity that actually looks at the diversity of species, the number of species in an ecosystem. But this can also apply to diversity in social neighborhoods. And could we, in fact, measure and quantify diverse thought, diverse, backgrounds? That diversity, in many ways, represents the resilience of an ecosystem, but also perhaps the resilience of a community. And
absolutely, I would agree with that.
Yeah, right. and so that we're working on the theory of diversity as a way to quantify our systems.
So, well, it actually equals sustainability, the idea that somebody had a long time ago that's never really coalesced very well, right?
Yeah.
At least not yet. But diversity is this trigger word for people, right? They immediately jump to racism and
feedback is welcome. Feedback is welcome. I've been, I like biodiversity, and so I wanted to generalize from biodiversity. So, if you guys think it's fatal, we'll rename it. But right now, I'm calling it diversity.
I'll throw in one piece related to information and diversity, is that unless information is communed, it's like you and I right now are sharing information and we're interacting with each other. Diversity can't work unless that happens. So do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So diversity, they usually have these little silos of, well, it's better to have 1,000 than 100 or 1. But I say, well, that's not a complete statement. Actually, there has to be interaction between them, which transforms information into communication, and eventually trust, which is commune.
Sounds good.
My thoughts on that, because you said
that's cool.
Any ideas?
Super. Thanks for the book.
I think of Ian McHarg when he was making comparisons of the rainforest compared to the desert, where the rainforest's abundance is in diversity through the multitude of organisms that would exist in it, while in the desert, value is found in their keystone species, where you may only have like a hawk or a snake or the mountain or the desert mouse. There's not many organisms that can survive in that particular environment. So in a rainforest, generalism is more well, I guess is generalism more specified in the rainforest and specificity more generalized in the desert? I don't know if I'm using the right words here, but
what is the question that you're trying to ask?
is that well, I mean, it was just the idea that like in the desert, specialization is held at a higher value than per se in the rainforest. Like you have such an
Because
abundance.
there's more resources in the rainforest versus the desert.
Yeah, yeah. So you have to you adapt to that environment, or organisms adapt to that environment based on its conditions heavier than if there's a lot of abundance, it's easier to, well, if this source runs dry, I could just go to this one over here. While in the
Sure.
deserts, it's like there is this one source, and
Sure.
it is a precedence to find it.
Yeah, I think, being alive in a time of abundance, like this analogy carries to humans, right? Being alive in a time of abundance allows for more um, jack of all trades kind of mindsets in this way. This is what dawned on me when you said this. And this
Mhm.
jack of all trades, I correlate directly with like philosophy, meta topics. Like I don't have to learn how to farm and grow my food so I can eat every night. I live in a world of abundance. I can go to the store and buy food. And because of this, I've been allowed the gift to be a philosopher of like technology and environmentalism and all of these things. And I'm in the meta world of creating society, right? Discussing society with a group of other philosopher friends every Saturday and exploring these topics. So I think, yeah, totally, Eric, that um, living in a place of abundance with a lot of resources, you're better off knowing how to do a little bit of everything so you can harvest the low hanging fruit and use less energy, probably.
Yeah, and in areas of scarcity, specialization really becomes key. So where it's like that trial of diversity or adversity, not diversity, but adversity,
Yeah.
where it's a means of survival.
Yeah. Okay, so I agree with that. And so with that, Carl, I see you wrote in here smaller local capitalism as opposed centralized corporations. And so that exactly goes kind of with this next topic question. I'd love for you to share a little more about that as we start into this next one, which is how does the local economy, hold on, I'm going to share my screen to show you guys where we're at, because these are all like pretty good guiding questions that should give us pretty good content. Um, how does a local economy remain open to the world without being drained by it? And so this it kind of links with this, having smaller local capitalism as opposed to centralized corporations, more like the local over the global network. And so we know in today's world, it's hard to live that way with just a local network. But how can we have something local, like what you just said here, smaller, systems over some big corporation run? You want to share a little more about that, Carl? What you meant by this comment?
Well, I think it seems like it's a truism that it's keeping profits in the community. Um, Small companies hire more people, more efficient with resources.
All their companies are.
Smaller companies.
Hmm.
I mean, it's the I mean, an example that stands out during the when Romney was running for president, he talked about that he created a company that hired thousands and thousands of people, but the critique was, well, and that was through Staples, which is now, I guess, gone bankrupt. But the counter argument is, but but those thousands and thousands of people, they don't make very much money, but they've extracted the profits out of all of the small stores that usually provided those materials, the stationary stores that used to be in every town. To me, I mean, that's a really simple example.
Sure.
Um,
And so what's the challenge there? Like, because everything has a pro and a con, right? Like you can go now to a Walmart and buy maybe a very similar product for less price as an individual. However, it now took the job of a small or 2 or 3 mom and pop shops of like writing material shops.
Well, I mean, to use that as if that's your example, and thinking globally, we're getting jeans for $14 or whatever, $20
Right.
because corporations are paying people in
Malaysia.
Bangladesh
Right, right.
nothing, and that they suffer. So the larger economic life support model is
Right.
very clear that that there's a global cost to being able to buy cheap goods, and
Sure.
so we depend on people in Bangladesh to make it, and then the inward, or what's happening is there's a concentration of wealth, which circles back to
Right. The value is being extracted and sent straight to the top to big corporate oligarch owners and hedge funds that own those companies.
and that are now literally taking over our media, controlling
Right.
government. I mean, it's all kind of it's an ecology that at some level makes a lot of sense.
Sure. It's like a system that created a monster, and now this monster is like you can't stop it. It's kind of crazy.
I somebody long time ago when I was researching that veggie oil conversion, I discovered this concept of microfinancing, Kiva, and like they associate it with like an all effective altruism, but um, putting liquidity putting liquidity into markets that have very low credit ratings. So like if you're someone that's in like Guatemala, it's pretty hard to get a bank loan because it's just nobody has any credit developed. But once you start developing credit in an area, then the loans can start flooding in. And I've noticed something. I can loan labor or like capital to someone here in my local economy and just my local environment. We're in a state of abundance. Very unlikely I'm going to get that money paid back because like there will be some kind of thing where it's like, oh well, this, that, and the other, or this, that, and the third. But I've noticed I've had a 90% plus rating of return when I invest in Kiva, this microfinancing. So I took over the course of like 3 years, I put like about like $1,500 in there, and I was able to quadruple that. Technically, like
Wow.
when people paid back, I would just put the money back out into Kiva. So I took technically it says I have 2,000 that I put in. It says that I've loaned out 6,000. Now I technically made more money than I've ever made in my entire life flipping money through that method.
Sure. And
But I
these are
could
what, micro loans? Like, what is the sort? Like, do
well
they
it's like
tell you what kind of projects they're lending to?
yeah, like my $25 to build a toilet in Vietnam is like 2-3
Sure.
grand over there in their money. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, it's a little bit more equivalent than that in the truth of the matter. But like so basically, like when you put that liquidity out there, and everybody has this argument, oh, people are coming to our country because they love our freedoms in America. That's a misnomer. People are escaping
Dude,
situations.
that's propaganda, dude.
Yeah,
Of
it's
course.
like it's like, and most people are just trying to pay the tax man. Like if you're
Sure.
in a state in abundance, you just need to pay the tax man. Like if
Sure.
but like if you're in a state of scarcity, you like have to rely on credit. So it's like this weird like a balance of the two where it's like what well like the mission that you feed yourself, the thing that gives you sustenance, um that's a driving force of economy. Yeah, voting with our feet, right? Yeah, so like that is like the nature of like liquidity, keeping the money in motion.
Keeping the money
So
in motion, keeping the money in good places, and like structuring that a bit more than leaving it wide open. I think this is like maybe where the concept of taxes come. We're like, okay, you make that money, sure, but there's money that's going to be spoken for a infrastructure you're using, B, the collective that you live around, And I think C, which is an important one, which is the next topic we're here, is to me is counting the environment as one of these stakeholders, which is my answer for this next section here. I'm sharing my screen with you guys.
Just a reminder, it's 23 for 23. I would like to honor the agreement with Thomas so that he presents within the 1.5 hour.
Great point. Yeah.
And it's economy and trade. So I think it's a perfect time for that presentation.
Yeah, this is actually a perfect one for Thomas. Potentially, I'd love for you to maybe even answer through the potentialism lens some of these questions. Like I was just on the question of how do we balance capital returns with social impact, and my answer to that is counting the environment as a stakeholder. Right, like. If you have a river near your factory, that is a stakeholder who earns a % of the profits, because inevitably you're going to need money to clean up the river from probably the mistakes you're making in it.
Well, here it's a social impact, so it's not necessarily environmental impact. How do we ensure that all people
I consider the river being clean, being social impact, because
it is
people need water down the river.
It is as well, sure.
It's all connected. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay, social impact. Interesting, right? Maybe same for a community. If your business is in a town and you're making so much money, you need to donate some money to the social programs of that community, the schools, the roads, the whatever. Okay, yeah, Sonia, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't realize time can by so fast. So Thomas, we have 6 minutes left on this call, and we're going to go over. I'd invite you to share. I'd love to. Are you connected there? Would you like to share a screen or show something about potentialism?
Yes, sure. I would like to share a screen. Do I have the rights to do so? No, didn't turn it on.
I'm giving the rights here. Yeah, so Thomas has been sharing potentialism with me, and he has a bunch of work done on it. I'd love to see this. Yeah, Tom, shoot for a 5-minute presentation and then some questions and answers afterwards.
Yeah.
That feels good.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to stop sharing?
Yes. I forgot. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you've done this, because it allows me to, take all your thoughts, deconstruct them, and then merge them with all of the work we've been doing. So,
yeah. So right now we can say we are in capitalism 5.0. So capitalism was invented in the 1600s, and there have been different versions, as you see here. And just 2019 plus, there was some changes where the pendulum swung towards antitrust, regulatory change, risk of rise of guilds, leveling of playing fields, and less income inequality. So this is being done by governments, and I researched. Don't hundreds of thousands of professors publish how to further improve capitalism? But this is a topic taken black. So there's no research published on it, and also no financing available. And that's why everything that remains is for us to do this people to do this in their spare time or as hobby, but not with professional financing. So
right, the system doesn't want to be changed.
Yeah, or in infographic like this. So we are discussing here dark topic, also self-sufficient communities. They're not in the interest of states. So so there's no funding for this. And let's say here, even the Pope said, Pope Francis here, said here below, we must adapt our socioeconomic models so they have a human face, because many models have lost it. Thinking about these situations and got names I want to ask, and then was asking about the other things. So a key problem is, look here at so we are roughly here. Look at the services per capita and resources. The resources are going down, and the services per capita will also quickly go down. This means we need to quickly change our system.
Graph. Can you go back to that graph for a second?
Yes. This is
that's really interesting.
And they didn't publish any successors to this. So the last one time they published it was 2009, afterwards it was not published to not create civil unrest, because that would soon go down
and this
very
is for
quickly.
this is for the US or for global?
Global.
This is US.
No,
This is
global.
I'm actually in touch with Club of Rome representative for the Netherlands, and he's very good. He's very active on X.
Yeah, and can you get the latest update from him?
Yeah, I mean, he's very up to date on this. So if you share this slide in particular, I can ask him. Leon Simons is in charge in the Netherlands. So very happy to see what his thoughts are on updates to this one.
Yeah, they even deleted this publication.
I'm hoping that a lot of the services per capita are going to increase, actually. So it'd be interesting to revise this one from 2009.
Yeah.
But you're seeing the services per capita because of automation stuff.
Oh, and more.
So you see it here. So I put it into the chat. Then you can please ask them if they find an update.
Thank you. Energy as well. I mean, the energy is going to drop 80%. We're going to be below a penny per kilowatt hour cost in 2035.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh my
goodness. Where do you think this is coming from? All from solar, or from?
What was the question?
You think that the dropping price of energy will come from what? Improvement in solar mostly, or what?
Yeah, batteries are dropping 80% from $53 a kilowatt hour to $10 a kilowatt hour, and solar is going to go from 8 cents a kilowatt, 8 cents a watt, to about 3 cents a watt, maybe 2 cents a watt, in 2035, just based on the Wright's law curve. And you got that much energy, you can count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. In this case, it's, try to power AI data centers with everything except for solar and battery.
Sure.
I gotta go into space.
Yeah, I mean, Elon's come clear on this, and of course, space, you don't even need the battery.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
Brian, as the price comes down, will the solar panels and batteries be kind of kinder to the environment as well?
Yeah, they're on the battery side. We're going to sodium iron phosphate, which is all common materials, and with Redwood Materials up in San Francisco, you can recycle 98% of those materials. And then on the solar side, we're actually there's some research at the CSIRO in Australia where they've actually started printing solar panels like newsprint, and the efficiency is around 15%, which is pretty good. And literally it's coming off rolls. It's roll-to-roll processing of solar panels. So forget the cookie cutter crystals or whatever that we've been done in the past. In the future, it's going to be a roll, and literally you can roll this thing out. So it's
awesome.
going.
Yeah, that's really cool. Nice.
Yeah. So
okay, Thomas, continue with potentialism.
Yeah.
Thanks for the link.
And to answer the question that we had before, so as potentialism, we embrace the 6 capitals framework, which also includes the human, the social relationship, the natural capital, but also intellectual, manufactured, and financial capital. These are more classical ones. So
this is one of the unique things, that you include all of these things in the whole economic model.
Yeah, but the 6 capitals frameworks work was published independently. It's not by us.
Okay.
Then
tell us the uniqueness of potentialism. Like, what makes it stand out compared to basic capitalism, compared to
Yes. So this all before leads to various problems, and now here then the solutions go in this direction of ethical decision making, ethical governance, fairness, and universal support for everybody. That people are being paid based on net benefit value, NBV, and that they can't just steal money.
That will require DNA modification.
What does it require?
DNA modification.
No, it requires that people cannot pay themselves wages, but instead have to use the net benefit value reward function here. And that leads to an economic shift.
I did a little breakdown of this, and so essentially how much you get paid is set or essentially calculated by how much value you're actually creating, which I think is an awesome idea. I have entrepreneurial ideas sometimes to like create something that looks nice, or I definitely know people would buy in a certain place, but then I consider like, is that making the world better in any way? And the answer is no for a lot of these like quick buck schemes, that I can invest a couple $1,000s and make a product to sell. And if the net, what is it? Net base value? What's the term?
Yeah, net beneficial value.
Beneficial value, right? If you're not bringing value to the collective, then you don't justify making millions and millions of dollars for, right? Like porn would be one of these things, is one of the big ones that comes straight to mind. Like no value, but so much money being made.
Yeah.
Okay. So continue. Yeah, Thomas, sorry.
So there would be a big job shift away from not beneficial jobs, like also marketing, insurance, and so on, would become state functions. So the state would objectively inform about products and provide insurance. And then it's far more efficient. Only 1/3 of insurance money paid in, it's actually being used to insure something. The rest is internal costs and marketing and sales and so on.
Sure. Okay, so you say this is like one of the major components, this like
Yes.
net beneficial value, and that based on this, the rest of the economy takes shape because there's a layer where, right, we all know productivity is increasing, like we said on the call, like we're creating more value as humans, and there's more money around, but it seems like with this you kind of control or like shape what is actually valuable, which is important.
Yeah, that's done by the 6 capitals frameworks. It must be valuable along one of the 6 capitals. Then it's valuable, and it's calculated how operations affect these 6 capitals between input and output of the operation. Okay, and that's then the reward function, and that's calculated based on that.
Yeah, yeah.
So Thomas, what is the integrated solution core? I see everything going through that. Is that some kind of AI engine, or
yes, exactly.
Who runs it?
The state would run it, and it's an AI engine together with experts. Exactly. And looking for the optimal solution. So it would be a science-based political system looking for really the optimal solution, independent of political views, and trying to amalgamize the sub-strategies into optimal overall solutions. So it would have a new monetary system and currency that can be tracked. So basically a good form of CBDC, central bank digital currency, the reward structure and assessment for well-performed work, regulation for information and communication to minimize fake news and to inform objectively. A shift around minimizing debt and instead reinvesting money instead of creating debt, minimizing misdirected incentives and optimizing for net benefit value rewards, an enforcement of accountability and ethics, and a GDP shift and shift of societal values. Maybe since we don't have much time, I'll show
anything else you want to add? We want to do some questions. Does anyone have any questions for Thomas? Or Thomas, anything else you want to share? Main point.
Thomas, what you shared.
Yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
Some key shifts maybe in jobs, like away from unethical work, like fake news, unscientific, unproven content, and so on. These would all be minimized or eliminated. Speculation, fraudulent activities, military, police, and so on. Parts of banking would be eliminated, marketing, sales, tax advice, and so on. And instead, jobs would be created in market and technology analysis and innovation, continuous improvement and innovation, research and development, So it would accelerate research and development and then caring jobs to care for other people instead. And there would be teams reviewing and improving project proposals on national levels. And so social, educational, and psychological and medical professions would get more money, and life enjoyment related jobs would get more funding.
Okay,
or this in a visual form. Misdirected incentives would be removed, like these ones. So I just recently, so speculation would be minimized. 10 times the world GDP is currently in speculation, and it's not doing much good. Instead, true innovation should be funded.
How much is in speculation?
10 times the world's GDP.
That doesn't even. What?
This is the printed money that goes directly into speculation.
Amazing.
There's $350 trillion of debt globally.
Whoa.
Yes.
Well, what a misnomer.
Yeah. So instead of doing real research that helps us, it's going into speculation. And here the idea is to instead put it into useful research.
Yeah.
To really improve our world, bring energy prices down and so on.
Okay, any other like really like, you know, things that you're like, wow, this is something that's going on in the economy? Because you've done so much research. I admit that economy is like the last piece of research that I feel like I've done the least of all of the other things. Yes. So I'm like really grateful for all of these great presentations. Like, what else do we need to know about in this perspective? And how does potentialism fix it?
It's about accelerating innovation. Okay, then let's see how.
I want to add, as you're sharing, you know, I'm super excited about this, all of this documentation Thomas has, because it's giving me, while I'm doing LLM processing, it's given me a good data source of like someone with a concept and like the seed to design a community around, and testing, you know, every time I iterate on the framework, I feed it this seed of potentialism to see, oh, okay, now create this kind of document for me with this framework as the skeleton and this seed of potentialism as the, you know, the initial seeding. Create for me this document or this instruction manual. So keep going, Thomas. It's really good. I've been getting pretty good results from it.
Yeah, thank you. So key elements would be an incentive and remuneration reform, inequality and influence mitigation, so that people are treated equally. Yes. In the center is to optimize the entire socio-economic system towards maximal creativity, innovation, and prosperity. Then optimize for sustainability to eliminate the root cause of inefficiencies. So we have many societal inefficiencies: abuse of power, corruption, crime, bad education, many societal ills, like we need to improve education, address health and psychological issues, and especially mental health issues. And we need to promote social harmony, minimize prejudice, hate, and discrimination, and minimize defamation. That's what it's at its core about.
Okay, nice.
So then, so the base principles are about derivation, logic, flow, like to analyze society and optimize it, to have elimination targets for negative things, like eliminating corruption and crime, accomplishment and integration targets, and education, collaboration, and psychology targets, and optimize all of this mathematically and optimize it overall, and have it as a holistic framework for the future.
How do you optimize psychology mathematically? Is that a challenge? I mean, some of the facts is that math is reaching a limit in its own offering, what it can measure.
So that's
some thoughts on that,
That's
Thomas?
actually a complex of optimizing education collaboration in psychology, and that this would judge the outcomes. How many people need mental health treatment? How many people are depressed? Why are they depressed? How much drugs do they need prescribed?
Right
Which dosage? This kind.
Yeah.
He's
I like your idea on the innovation, increasing innovation. I'm noticing Justin's comment. There's so much innovation out there, it's just all being suppressed, is what I got from Justin's comment.
Yes,
So,
exactly. And actually, also, this is being suppressed. There's no publications on how to improve our current capitalism. Instead, media prefer fundamental capitalism criticism and say we shouldn't have capitalism anymore, but something better. But it's actually difficult to find something better. But why is nobody trying to optimize capitalism?
It's a poor argument of they killed one of, I forget who the guy's name is, but he was one of the members of the USSR, and he was like, well, why don't we just advocate for free markets? And they were like, oh no, and it's much appreciation here, my friend.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a group. Like Thomas has a bunch of groups set up to like keep the conversation going. He's coming up with some strategies on bringing awareness to this topic through different channels.
Yes, exactly. You can join them, and I can share these groups in the chat. I shared them before, and also on our web portal. There's also some links to it. Here you see some key elements. Key element is elimination of crime and unethical work, which might escape into niches. So then doing the remaining crime minimization and changing the societal reward function, meaning the wages to societal net benefit value, unleashing of time and money, then using that for new practical solutions, products and services, get new insights and optimizations. AI is optimizing and proposing automation in all fields under expert supervision. Key elements. Have an organization of optimized teams and organizations, empowered autonomous self-contained individuals and teams, maximal cooperation and conflict avoidance and conflict resolution. Some key accelerated work, R&D and innovation, brain-centric design, all types of flow, like flow state, optimized flow of goods and services, planning ahead, and so on. So systematic innovation.
I see someone in the chat just put like 1 second, Thomas. I just want to pause on this thought where because potentialism is offering a solution in a lot of ways that connect a lot of dots. For example, here ECVM Earth Change Vending Machine just wrote, innovation is suppressed because owners expect profit, and innovation reduces profit for all but the innovator. Right, like Dr. Brian, you brought up this point earlier of I just lost my train of thought. It was like 3 points I wanted to like link together. That like money comes into the system, things are valuable. So someone creates value, packages it, and sells it to others, and they make money. And so they make money, they create abundance for themselves, and they, even though they have everything they'll ever need for this lifetime and many lifetimes, for their kids, kids, they still continue to amass profit and wealth. And so this is, I think, the mechanism that needs to be, right? It's always internal. It's always the human. It doesn't matter what the economic system is. People are going to find loopholes if the goal is to hoard profits because it gives you power. What does that look like conceptually? Where like there's a cap on, you have all the things you need and will ever need for this lifetime, and like, maybe sure you want to give your kids a good life for one full generation, and that's some number that's equated. And then after that, there's like a strong, it doesn't have to be wealth tax, but has to be like your money needs to be redistributed into some form of social environmental impact thing. I don't know, but then that starts sounding a lot like, hey, once you make so much money, you got to give it all away, and that I think would kill. Like, I think it would kill the urge to make more money off of stupid products. But if you were doing a thing that you're passionate about because it's good for the world, even if you're not making money, whatever. If you have all the things you need in life, I would keep doing it anyways. I don't know. I'm like maybe losing. Is anyone following what I'm trying to share there?
There's a book. I don't know if I shared it in the chat because I was just sharing a bunch of books that I had on my wish list of Goodreads. But there's this concept where it's just the social dominance theory, where it's strictly social relations. So people that are in those networks, it's like, I hate to use the term, but gold digging. It's just gold digging. Like, if you're in a social network where wealth is the incentive of social acceptance, then your incentive is to do that. Or
right, to have wealth because that makes you more valuable in your social group.
Yeah, it's like if you're living with a bunch of punks, that like despise money, like it would be the It's like, how can I make myself look like a goof,
Sure.
Or I don't know. It's like it's
right.
based
Okay.
on
So what you're saying is tying it to the social metrics, right?
yeah,
Money right now, right? Money because it's a social metric. Brian, do you have something to say to this?
yeah.
Recently, in recent days, people have brought up several times the Star Trek economy, which is basically that the basic needs, basic services are provided as part of the community. And then, you still probably have some credits you can use when you're, you know, uh, off doing something. But the necessities are covered pretty well. And I think that framework provides a safety net, a fabric, and it enables people to retrain when their jobs are displaced. I mean, we're going to see a huge displacement over the next 10 to 20 years. And so building that safety net is essential. And some countries are leading on that, and some countries are way behind and falling further behind. And, somebody gets sick in the US and they have to go bankrupt. Just, it's criminal.
That's crazy.
That's exactly where we are.
Rise on the increase. Do you guys believe in UBI or not?
Yeah, definitely, dude.
Well,
at some point,
there are merits to UBS, which is Universal Basic Services. And, part of it is voting with your feet, right? Go to communities where, like, we like Mexican food, right? So we're here in LA and we're going out in Mexican food every night. So you can choose your food and energy
but that's not UBI. UBI is we all get a check that covers our basic needs.
It's all money, but the problem is money is just a proxy for wealth. It's not wealth. Whereas the Universal Basic Services is about communities producing the basic wealth. And I think there's a lot less chance for gamification if it's UBS. And so be interested
how does that differ? How does that differ, Dr. Brian? Like, that means you get sent a box of food and you're issued a house instead of being given money to make your own decision?
I think it's more about community scale. In other words, each community has these permaculture zones, right? And you go from like zone 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as you join a community. And that's what we're doing right now with Belbunya. And you go through those stages, right, where you're building trust with the community. And the community over time, I think, is going to be offering energy, food, and labor on some basis. And what we need to do is develop the DNA so that these communities can do that. The reason it's focused on decentralization is that, first of all, so many problems of the poly crisis are from over centralization. And part of it is, the gangsters are taking over the money supply in the US. I mean, it's just an example of gross breach of trust. And with that trust needs to be built locally and regionally. And I think we've got to get back to communities. And ultimately, when we hit the fourth turning, and I hope we'll be hitting the fourth turning this next, this decade, we're going to be moving from crisis back into civic organizations. And the root of democracy, if you will, or civil society are the community civic organizations, ultimately. And that, it's kind of like the way it was in the 30s and 40s. And
Right, these are
there's
like
an 80-year cycle. They're like co-ops, yeah. And so there is a lifetime, an 80-year cycle of four turnings that, that seems to, it's not identical, but it rhymes. And I think we're going to be, coming out of crisis in the coming years. And that's kind of like finishing World War II and moving into civic society. And the question is, what is the civic society that we'll build?
At first, we will probably have collapse. If you look, for example, at the large debt cycle. So right now we have record amounts of debt.
Agreed. And that's why we have to measure wealth. Look, the dollar is no longer a store of wealth. So I've been asking, what is real wealth? And, certainly having community, energy, food, and, labor is huge. And so we're actually looking at converting dollars into these community resources. And then there's something I have to mention, and that is I recently joined the Regenerative Currency Federation, which talks about OSWAPs that enable exchange of community currencies between communities, that builds a network of regenerative communities around the world. And so when we talk about each of our regen neighborhoods, we use OSWAPs to, exchange between those communities. And that's a very interesting.
Cool. What is this? What is this thing called that you just said? That group?
Well, there's something called OSWAP, which I'm just learning about, but it's part of, it's built on Base, which is built on Ethereum. So you got Ethereum, you've got Base, you've got OSWAPs and the regenerative currency. It's called local scale. And this is all about community currencies. And basically, it's happening right now. It's like Seeds 3.0. They've learned a lot and they're really going better. So since we're talking about economy,
that's cool.
Yeah. And so we do weekly calls with the Regen Currency Federation. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this evolves, but effectively it's a de-dollarization.
Yeah. Can you send a link for that? I'd like to read more about that.
Yeah, I will send a link to Regen Currency Federation and put it in the Miro board. And, I see this as the chance for us to define real wealth, start moving our assets or whatever resources, voting with our feet and producing real wealth at community scale. And then hopefully we can have a federation or even a network state of regen neighborhoods that'll be global. And want to co-op some of the regen, what is it called? The network state machinery to produce regenerative neighborhoods the world over, maybe even with OSWAP exchanges. So you could go from one community to another and your credits from one community can help you in the next community.
Yeah. That's like for sure the dream, to be able to like have an economy that is local to the places where you frequent, where you have homes and you have individuals, and that at the smallest, most reasonable scale is like so doable. All the stuff is there already. You just need to get a few people on board.
Exactly.
Okay, OSWAP. So they're leading that.
OSWAPs. Yeah. I mean, and these folks are real, currency economists, right? They're bankers. They're very high end. And so I think it's a chance to use blockchain in highly regenerative ways to really bring resources to the communities. And I like to say, there was proof of work and proof of stake, but thanks to Ben Hunt, I learned about proof of plant around 2020. And we're moving to proof of participation, which includes circles like we're in right now, right? In other words, the work we're doing right now, we should be, getting tokens of various kinds, utility tokens that I think it has to do with social capital that we're building right here. We're weaving that network of social capital. And proof of plant is proving the plants that we grow. And of course, that's primary production. And so we'd like to evolve the soft hard currencies of the future to reflect some of these fundamental sources of wealth. I guess the other one I'll add is I like to say proof of power, but it's really proof of energy. But proof of power, plant, and participation would be 3 Ps that we might consider.
Yeah, you bringing this up gives me like, Eric, this is one of those solutions to where you brought up a really good point that like the social, right, as social creatures, we connect directly our social acceptance to our survivability, which is something from a long time ago, but we still do it. inevitably. And so that's a double edge why obviously having money is the mechanism for survival now, but also it's a social mechanism. So how much money you have, sure, once you have enough to live a whole life, whatever, let's say that's $10 million, you can live a really good life forever for your whole life, however old you get, maybe, potentially, or 100 million, whatever we set that number to. There's always still a metric above that, which is like, sure, everyone can survive, but if everyone's surviving, how do we compare ourselves to each other? And money, like you said, is one of those metrics to like, oh, well, they made more money, they must be more successful, or whatever that is. But like Dr. Brian just brought up is really interesting, that if we had some agreed upon mechanism that values us for, like, we've all spent dozens of hours now on these calls discussing, right, doing the philosopher thing, which we can agree got, the Romans and the Greeks ahead in some way, because they were thinking about stuff, thinking about thinking even, and in advanced thinking. So now that we're thinking about regenerative society, we're putting that work in. Yeah.
Brain blast. It's like I was thinking like, oh, I gotta scratch my brain, and then I was like, oh, that sounds like it's gonna be really painful. Thank God I have a thick skull.
Yeah.
Protect the brain. Oh, ow, it's jelly. Well, the other day, like my friend was like I said something that was rude to him. I was like, I don't trust you guys. I was like, I can't trust you guys. Like, I don't know. I was like thinking about like, well, why can't, you get your show on the road with whatever you're doing? And it's like, well, I just don't have valued trust. And it's like, that comes through the communication. So it's like, I don't know. There was something, I don't know. The idea of like, oh, I would like to prefer to spend time with like a family member. Why am I spending time with my certain associates? Or like, why am I spending time with associates over the others? And then, I don't know.
You're like touching on tops, and I see you like coming up with points, but you're
hooked. Yeah. Now I'm like, this is going to, by the end of this, I'm going to be so stupid that I'm not going to have time to even think. I'll just be able to do things again.
Yeah.
Which is, that's cool.
Okay, well, I want to keep this thought going because, Justin, you said in here, why are we comparing? And then I think we were talking about like social perceptions of each other. I would say it's not the best behavior, but humanity definitely does that,
Yeah, I'm just bringing to the surface what I'm hearing and reflecting it back. I'm not in judgment. I hear it and I see it and I know we do it, but it's
sure. Like, is that a biological thing we do, or is that just like a thought construct that, like, how can you know yourself without something else to compare yourself to in a way?
Contrast is very healthy. Comparison is due to some, generally it falls back to lack and separation, and you're better, I'm better than me, and that's your life is better than mine, or my life is better than yours, or these concepts.
Sure, it's a huge trap. You definitely shouldn't. Sure. It's like agreed upon that's like definitely not the best way to live your life.
Contrast, I think, is great, right? That's that conversation about diversity, right? Contrast.
Bean counting.
And this comes up for me around the swapping. I go back to the days when D Hawk wrote the first book out of the banks on community currencies. It's like, who's this weird fuck from the highest of high talking about community? I thought, there's potential. But it's continuing, according to Brian, this network, which I'd like to get hooked up with Brian, is they're continuing to look at what the swap mechanism is of the money that represents all of these exchanges and values that we speak to. And I do have concern, well, who's going to compare what this, the currency of this community versus the currency of this community? They want to get together or swap over so we can join each other in exchange and use currency to represent it. But there's a whole value conversation around defining that swap mechanism and who's determining that and how does it work. And it would have to be automated at some level, because we're talking, if this would work, hundreds of thousands of communities, which I actually believe the one place potentially for this, for hierarchy, is all of these communities have their own currencies to exchange within themselves. But eventually we've got to be able to exchange with other communities.
Right.
And it's a huge challenge. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I have one, but I'll leave the floor for someone else.
Can you restate the challenge again so I can understand it concisely?
So exchange of information or goods or products or services, if you want to generalize it, that's an economy. There's this thing we use called money or currencies to represent those exchanges within a small community or globally. And there's layers out from local communities to regional to national to global, right? And there would have to be a way to exchange that money like we do now with paper currencies, but it's not really a very effective way. And all of the currencies are collapsing now, not just the US dollar. It's based on the US dollar for the most part, because we have control of the money system and become bullies with it. So, how would we deal with that? And right now, we should all be getting, like you said, little tokens or whatever that increase each other's value based on maybe their activity or interaction or insights.
Yep.
But that's a scoring system, and it gets pretty challenging.
It's an accounting system. I mean, money has many purposes. Unit of account is one of them, and I think it's good to be able to account for the work that everyone does. That's probably a good thing. But it's a good question, and I think one of the topics we're wrestling with is, do we have separate currencies for proof of plant, proof of power, proof of participation, or should there be one currency? Should they be at community scale, or somehow federated? Now they're planning on OSWAPs to enable communities to exchange their local currencies very easily. And the miracle of Wurgel, the miracle of Basel, just had one credit pool. It was really a community credit pool. And the trust of a community is what they're banking on. In other words, you're in a community, you build a certain amount of trust, and that's highly valuable. And I think right now they're leaning towards local currencies that can be swapped.
You're talking about human trust between each other, which is an evolutionary process of a community, right?
And it's funny because they talk about bank of trust, they talk about credit unions, they talk about credit pools and resource pools. So there's a spectrum that we can paint from the traditional venerable bank and trust company and the credit union to a credit pool in crypto terms, and a resource pool, which are already developed. I put in Will Reddick's work in Kenya on this. And that means, I think the convergence is towards each neighborhood has a local trust currency, and there's this OSWAP federation mechanism to efficiently move between them. So
like, let's do a thought experiment. I would like to do a thought experiment. Okay, your community lives by the ocean, Dr. Brian, and you get awesome fish and kelp and have your energy. And we live in the mountains.
Right.
And so we each definitely value, Kevin keeps coming to mind right now, where we have a common denominator of things we need for survivability: water, food, energy, waste, right? And maybe because I'm in the mountain and I'm at the source of the river where the water comes out, I have a lot of water, but maybe not a lot of food, or not a lot of meat up here. Whereas you by the ocean maybe don't have a lot of water, but you have a lot of fish. So your value for fish is much lower than my value for fish, whereas my value. And so I guess the question always is what is the common denominator? Today, or for the last, let's say 50 years, it's been the US dollar has been the common denominator in a lot of value exchange. Let's detach from that, created construct of dollar. What does OSWAP use? Or I think of it in software terms, each community is its own software. And it seems like this OSWAP is like an API that connects the two pieces of software so they can interrelate. So in there must be some mechanism. Yeah.
OSWAP is a currency exchange mechanism that's highly efficient. So it's not like going to your bank and getting your 1% charge to do a swap. You know, you probably do it for 0.1% or 0.01%.
Right.
And so the whole point is that with OSWAPs, you're on a blockchain, everyone's got a digital wallet on their phone, and they can do these currency exchanges because there's somebody making a market, you know, exchanging currency pairs. And so that's really a nice digital version of what exists already. The point is it's at community scale. So that means we've got two communities and they can be federated and interoperating.
Sure. So I guess I've been going through this thought process because, right, this idea is in my mind as well. We know, you know, dozens of communities personally that our goal would be to bring them in like a federation where we're all friends. We all agree to being in this collective, and we want to put something on the table to show what we have in abundance, right? In our thought experiment, your community would put fish on the table.
Sure.
My community would put water on the table.
Right.
Someone else's community, maybe they make artisanaries. They would put a beautiful elaborated crochet pattern on the table.
Yeah.
So
or
I guess
hydropower or, you know, other services, right? All sorts of things.
Sure. And so I guess my question is, like, I get the technical piece of how something can swap, but my question is, like, what becomes the common denominator? Like, for example, one we thought of is like night stays. Like, we guarantee you, like, one token maybe represents like a bed in a covered accommodation unit. And that maybe becomes comparable for two places because a room and a bed is a room and a bed with a bathroom in it, or maybe in a shared room. Comparable.
You know, in a real sense, credit pools work slightly differently. It's double entry accounting. In other words, somebody can post, hey, I'm willing to, you know, plow somebody's driveway or, you know, do some landscaping for this rate, you know, and that's an offer, right? And so when somebody says, okay, I want to do that, then you create a credit on the landscaper side and a debit on the householder side, if you will. And so you create that double entry bookkeeping that works at community scale, and those credit pools work all within a community. In other words, the local currency, if you will, is taken there. And the nice thing is the phones and the wallets can actually digitally interoperate. So if you go to some other town and you want a beer, you just pay for it with the local currency by tapping your phone, and it does it in the local currency. So it really, the current local currency represents a trust network, a local trust network, physically and geographically. It could be a bioregion, or it could just be a local community. Right. And then rates float. The rates actually float. But the point is, in credit pools, there's a very strict limitation against printing more tokens because you're not allowed to do that. And so that's part of the tokenomics that's being worked out. A credit pool is strictly double entry bookkeeping for every part of it. Which is different. So people can bid and offer on various goods and services within a community. So I think that's part of the idea. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm excited. I have a lot of questions about this topic. You know, that's why I put definitely the least amount of thought into economic models. I was like, I always figured, okay, there's someone that's put a lot of thought into this and they've written a bunch of stuff, and I'm just going to fast track into stepping into the economic design thing. I'm grateful for you, Thomas, with that. Okay, interesting.
So I think we can stand on the shoulders of giants. We can pull in a bunch of references. I'm happy to liaise with Regen Currency Federation, which I think I put the link in. And cool. Yeah, I think it presents an opportunity where we can really leverage that and hopefully develop these, again, local frameworks, because clearly, you know, you give boys gasoline and within a few years they're blowing up the monetary system. So centralized stuff isn't working. So this is a new federated decentralized approach, which does the stated goal of decentralizing you know, power, money, influence, and enabling community level abundance and wealth. And I think that's how we measure real wealth in an objective way.
Yeah. So my question is still on this thought experiment, you know, of like two different places, your place by the ocean, my place in the mountains, and, you know, a third place in the plains, and they make artisanaries. And so we each have a value for those things that we want. Like, yeah, I guess my mind just like wraps around the idea of right now we have the dollar again as like that common denominator. Oh, this is worth this many dollars. Great, I'll give you this many dollars. But without the dollar in play, what becomes that common denominator? Like again, I give the example of, we were experimenting with, okay, I'll put up a night stay as like an exchange metric. So if you have a place that also has a night stay, we can exchange based on that kind of denomination of a room with a bed as like the small currency.
Maybe this can be a reflection of basic needs. So you get
Right,
shelter, water,
shelter,
food, and maybe labor.
And this maybe has to do with the token system you were talking about, Brian, of like a different currency for different things, like sure, food, water, shelter, service.
There could be 100 regen neighborhoods, and each one has its own local currency. But the point is that since you have a digital wallet and you have your local digital credits, there's the OSWAPs takes care of exchange between communities, and it's a floating rate. But
that's the thing. How do we know what the exchange rate is between mine and your community?
The price discovery is done with market bids and offers. Just it's a way that markets tend to work pretty well. If you just look at the way currencies are traded internationally, they move slowly. But and that's even with all these countries printing dollars, fiat, which is crazy, right? But credit pools are not fiat. Credit pools are double entry bookkeeping, and so the research that the RCF is doing is using strict double entry accounting kind of credit pools that don't allow for the kind of boys and gasoline behavior of just printing $5 trillion willy-nilly, which is what's happening in the right now. So it gets away from that, wealth stealing behavior.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Okay, cool. I have a bunch of questions. I have like 5 prompts open on different things that I'm like now about to dive into. Okay, anyone else? What is we have a few minutes. It's 5:15. This is nice. So obviously we're in the very open space thing where we're just talking about things. If anyone wants to go deeper, we can like create a little breakout group and branch off into a conversation. But right now we're like in a pretty nice collective one. All right. Economy. Any topics? Anyone else have anything they want to bring up? I have a ton of questions, but
I do. I would like to, at least so that we can. I know a lot of what we talk about here is like what's in the reality as we know it, and so we work from there and we try and make that better. But I think we should at least consider that, systems like the quantum financial system, Nasara, Jasara, and working backwards from like, well, what if we were already the bank ourselves and we had an open ledger? We could move money, gold-backed money back and forth. What would that look like? I think even if we just spent 10 minutes talking about that from that perspective, as opposed to like a lot of what we've been doing is just trying to fix the old, but you can't fix the old. I mean, the old is completely, it's like, it's like trying to put another crutch under something is going to die.
Sure. So you're suggesting to explore this quantum financial system. I'm just like looking it up. I don't know much about it. What's like give us a summary of it.
So think in terms of call it Ethereum, XRP as a part of the underlying flow, where Starlink is the mechanism to allow for the electronic transfers. It's an open ledger. Sure. There's no gap in between. It's basically a replacement for the SWIFT system, but there's no, short of gas fees, there's really nothing in between you and anyone else to make a transfer. And because it's completely secured and open, you're not there, it won't allow for crime-based transactions to happen. So it's like a benevolent operating system for financial transactions.
Okay, how does it like track that to not let like those kinds of transactions go through?
That's that quantum layer of it, in terms of, it's the same way, like if you ask OpenAI or ChatGPT or any of these LLMs certain questions, they won't answer them, right?
Yeah.
That's a filter probably created by its creators, by governments forcing them to put those filters in. But I'm talking about a benevolent energy that oversees that financial system.
Okay, Justin, do you have any projects in mind that are like, writing? Because I'm reading a little bit right now, background. I'm doing like a few searches on what this is. You have any projects that stand out in your mind? Or like any like good examples? Like I can understand the conceptual topic, but
well, okay, so let me give you an
from
example.
an idea to how something actually implements. I'd love to see something about that.
Yeah, so well, what I'll do is I'll give you an example, because the system is already running actually side by side alongside every transaction you're making right now within a bank or otherwise electronically. The system is running now. So take an example in the States. Many on this call may not be familiar with the service called Zelle, Zelle.
Zelle, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
this is
I can send you money instantaneously
for free.
With no, why? Why is that? Why is that there? Why has it been there for 2 years running? Why does it exist? What is it? What is actually? What is Zelle?
Right.
What is?
It's an API. Right. It's just an API between American banks that allow them to just send money to each other.
And why are they allowing that now, where they normally charge you a fee for every transfer, like a PayPal would? Why has that been running the way it has?
Probably competition.
But yeah, competition, right? Because now you can transfer on all kinds of other apps, and other people are making that money, and they're like, oh shit, money's leaving our system. Let's keep money in our system by giving them the features, right? This is the vote with your foot power, right? I foot power to crypto, so all my money is in crypto pretty much. I no longer keep anything in banks and in fiat. So like I've exited that system, and I don't even leave my money, so they can't 10x loan it out to anybody else. So that's a loss for them, because it's so much easier to transfer in other worlds.
So the bank owns Zelle.
Yeah, from what I understand, Zelle is, it's agreed upon by banks that service provides intermediary services for FDIC insured, right? Because at the end they control it. I got a transfer from a Zelle account once, and 2 days later, the bank pulled the money out of my account and said, oh, that person claimed someone hacked their computer, so you can't keep that money. And it was like $5,000. So I was just literally out $5,000, because I had already sent what I sent in the mail. Like that was crazy to me. And there was no insurance on it. There was no like, I followed up and they're like, oh no, they filed a police report. So that's it. Your money's gone. Like I found that to be crazy.
Terrible.
So what I would do, what my point being is, like, look for examples that are already operating. Like what other services are out there where you can transfer money for nearly for free.
Sure.
It's do your research on Nosara and Jasara.
And so
we're talking from a lot of perspective of like that debt is real. Debt is fraud. They need your birth certificate because it is a trust fund. It's loaded with money because you've consented to getting a driver's license, to going to college. All that increases your trust fund, which is your bank, which is your birth certificate. So we're working and talking a lot from places of our own misinformation. Like we're talking a bit from ignorance. We're trying to fix systems that are based on fraud. And so the more we can become aware of that fraud that's going on, the more you can, like you said, you stepped away from the banks and you're not, maybe you don't operate on credit anymore. But it's like the way we manifest, what we're trying to do here is we've got to go beyond just like, how do we just add another thing to the existing system so that we can integrate to the old? And there's a little bit of like going beyond that and saying, what if the world was like this, and those mechanisms are there. Like if you do your research on Nosara and Jasara and understand why the debt is all made in fraud, like that is helping you unravel what has been done to humanity so that we can create from a new place. We're We're kind of just creating from what we can do right now. And I get that. I appreciate that. But we're doing that.
I think like the step we're on right now is exploring what is there and what are or at least for me, it's we know what's there. I have a decent awareness of like, yes, I agree with you on debt is a money. It's just a derivative that people get to speculate and invest on and just keep that money machine moving for themselves. Cool. Got it. Now we're exploring like what are actual solutions that are out there, like this OSWAP thing that you were just sharing, Dr. Brian. That's a solution that's out there. You know, IOTA. I'm seeing Vitaly, you're posting about IOTA right now. It is an interesting project. I added it to the board as well. Thank you for sharing that. And so, right, this quantum financing system, there's definitely ideas that are out there that speculatively work based on a bunch of technologies being stuck together. Right, like I can spool up my own token that I have full control to, if I want, and if people agree, that becomes a new kind of money. It's what Bitcoin is, right? And that's completely out of control of anyone. It's just a double-sided ledger that exists online, and that's now a new money. So does that count to you as a quantum financial system? Yeah,
but sort of. I mean, the quantum aspect of it becomes there's a benevolent overseer of the transactions. So yes, it's taking exactly what you said, and I think if we all understand that, we can become our own bank right now today. It's very simple, actually. In terms of the quantum financial system, it sounds big and it sounds like, oh, it's so magical and all that. No, it's the same thing you just said, but it's everyone agreeing like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, and someone's clearly already figured it out with XRP as the rails and other things playing into that to make it work. Sure. And if we've got Starlink everywhere, we can do those transactions
back.
Yeah. Thank you, Carl. Oh, Carl left. We didn't get to say bye. Okay, guys. So it's 5:30. It's 5:24 right now. We have a few minutes. Carl just had to jump off the call. So I'm really piqued right now by the concept of economy, and like still the question burning in my mind is, and I think Dr. Brian, you gave an answer to this, that it happens through like demand offer scenarios where that's tracked and that starts gauging the price for stuff. You know, so like, let's say in my community, I'm super hungry. So fish is of super high value to me in this moment. And I happen to have a lot of water and you need water. So I go, cool. For those 6 fish, I'm willing to give you 3 gallons of water.
Well, that's barter. We can move beyond barter and just say, you know, you've got the mountain currency and we've got the sea currency, and what we do is create a trading pair between mountain and sea, and it's just the currency that swaps.
What is that currency, right? I'm still one step before you, right? You're saying, oh, there's already a currency. I'm still at the.
Okay. Well,
I guess my engineering mind is
it's a credit pool. In the community, and so you can read up on Will Ruddick's credit pools, but they're resource pools. And what you do is there are bids and asks for goods and services within the community, and you know you can post a bid or an ask for any kind of good or service, and you know there's a certain number of credits, and it's really just a credit unit. You know, you can name it for your town or your community or whatever, and it's an arbitrary utility token, if you will. And they're just accounted for as credits and debits, and you're allowed a certain amount of credit as an individual. And as you get into the inner circles of the community, you can probably increase your credit limit. And and so it's a community credit is what it is. Just like a credit pool is a community credit. And so those are the tokens that gets swapped with the other communities when goods and services are traded.
Right. And the purpose of swapping with the others is so that, but then they have those tokens and they could use them at your place for other stuff.
Like somebody comes over and wants a beer, you know, you just, you show them your phone, it all, you know, you tap to pay and it gets transferred. Yeah. And so that way you move beyond barter. It's a lot simpler.
Right. I guess I'm curious how like the math would happen. Like even again, now within our own, we're setting up our own, the value for our token.
Yeah.
And what do we set up the value of that token to? That's still where my mind goes, right? I'm like at level 0, right? We're now all 8 of us are all living together and we each have something. We each have some knowledge, right? You know how to plant food. You know how to run the water filter. I know how to make websites. You know how to sew things and whatever.
Right. So markets are good at price discovery. And what you do is
this is price discovery, what I'm
you have
looking
bids
at.
and asks, and it's the easiest way is to post a bid and ask thing, and that's the price discovery. Especially if you have a community of 100 or 300 people, or larger, it could be a bioregion. You could have a bioregional currency, and the bids and asks that can all be done online with price discovery. It's fully automated these days, and it's all doable on your phone.
Right. I think that would be a cool thing to like. Okay, so there's, like I guess my thought would be like, it would be interesting to see like, okay, we all have these things on the table that we can put.
Yeah.
This is what I like, even as like a thought experiment, like, okay, for that thing you have, I would give you like in the starting, right, the core of exchange, the core of economy is bartering. I have this, you have that, how much of this thing? And again, that becomes very subjective. But with enough data points of people doing enough barters, I'm sure some mechanism would eventually unravel to like normalize that on average, 6 apples is equal to your car getting cleaned.
Well, here's an example. I'm looking at spending tens of thousands of dollars on an energy storage system for a regen community, and the offer I'd like to put on the table is that we can provide that energy that's coming from solar and battery for 90% of the price or 10% discount relative to what the utility would pay, and you cover that until the system's been paid for, and it's basically a lease to own system where after N years, the system transitions to community ownership. And so it's a lease to own approach to where you'd have these exchanges, but you can set the prices to be something, that has a reference. And in this case, it's a utility reference. In other cases, there'll be going rates for people doing certain services. So I think at a community scale, it's very much like just having prices for things in dollars and posting want ads and posting service ads. And that can be done online. So that, and then locally, you could probably trade in your local currency, or you could trade in the bioregional currency, or other, there are probably exchanges even with crypto. And so the point is that we've got the tech available on our phones right now. Everyone can be banked on their phones. We don't need the central banks anymore. And the central banks are, they're charging 1% and 2% for every transaction, for every foreign transaction, things like that. And we just need to move beyond that. And so I think that's
the middleman game. The middleman. There's
we've been talking about the swapping. I think Ian has a good question.
Good.
How do you earn community credits in your program?
Well, I think what I've heard is that people offer services and goods like, I'll install some solar panels, or, we've got some solar panels to sell, or other services. So you can offer goods and services for token payment. And that's the way it worked way back in the 1930s, when this was remarkably successful in Wurgel, Austria, and also in Basel, Switzerland. So we can go back 80 years, almost 100 years, to look at the success at community scale of this kind of approach.
Not sure that answered my question about how did somebody earn the money.
If you provide services, you earn tokens.
So, Vic, I have a little bit of an answer for this, matching Ian's question, where he says, how could Regen Tribe community credit as a social experiment be used? And so in the early phases of our project, where we had like no funding or just a bit of funding, a lot of the collective members did labors of hour, right? Their skill set, and they priced it at like a normalized market price for like marketing services or admin services or whatever they were doing. And some of it we were able to pay with money because we had some funding, and some of it we paid with hugs, this token that represents a night stay and food. And so we were going kind of on this universal basic needs idea, where we started kind of basing on the volunteer model, where if you give a certain number of hours, you're guaranteed a safe, comfortable place to sleep, a lunch, a breakfast, and a lunch, or 2 meals a day. And so this was kind of our base needs economy that was working. Yeah. It's that, Ian. Dude. So everyone, I want to give maybe a gratitude moment. I think we should include this in the calls as part of our culture as well, of like sharing gratitude. And I'm grateful for all of you and your thoughts and sharing. And I'm like super grateful for Ian. He just arrived a few weeks ago, and he's like really excited about implementing technology into us as a collective, that now we're a pretty consistent group. And so I'm excited. I'm going to be spending a lot of time on this with Ian in the next couple of days and weeks. We'll be sharing like updates of what's going on, integrating. He put a bot in the chat just a few hours ago, which is super cool. And now, we're discussing the revamp of a lot of these tools that help build our ecosystem, right? I agree with you, Vic. Tribes is a V1. It's like a clickable prototype plus. It has some of the features we want, but it's really a Frankenstein, bootstrapped tool that we built. Tribes is
the Tribe platform. You're talking about the platform.
Yeah. We're like, it's good for.
We are going to have to build something different. I've done a lot of research on this. And I invite people to come and ask me questions about the AME that I'm working on, because I need help. AME standing for Affinity Mapping Engine, which means how to create relationships in a community. And all these things secondarily come into it. Right. And yes, we're going to use technology, which is our offspring. It's not this separate thing. Right. It's something we have manifested. And how we manage it, just like a child or work with a child growing up, it's going to be critical. So anyone that wants to give me a shout on the Regen tribe, I'm there.
Okay. I want to double tap on that, Vic, in 1 second. I want to reply to this. The hug token sounds good, but the users who worked must gain land ownership, else they are never free. And so the idea with the hugs token is it represented access to land, right? In this concept of stewardship over ownership, where as long as you're holding a certain number of tokens, you are guaranteed a place to be in the community, living space. You essentially enter this, like, we were trying to model it after the traditional Dream Factory model, where if you have a token, you own a night at the property in perpetuity for as long as the project exists. So technically you own like a 1/365th slice ownership of a room. So maybe that is kind of the direction that the hug token would go, is you can use them initially to pay for nights at existing locations, but paying for nights over time would accrue to your part ownership of the property, right? The idea is we are all owners of this place. And like this, we don't treat it extractively. We treat it in like a stewardship model. And like shaping that is something I'd love to go deeper on as we're talking about economy in a practical case. If you have
Why
any,
would I
like,
do that if I can just steal the banks and steal from everybody, have enough and take over and buy the land myself, and you become my slave? It seems like a much easier model.
Much easier model, right? Which is why everyone's doing it now, which is why the people that have been doing that for long enough continue to do it. Yeah.
Okay, well, in a less dystopian light, the question of regenerative neighborhood succession is an important one that gets touched on by Sonia to some extent, with the rightmost question. And I think there is an opportunity for us to recognize sweat equity when it comes to a community, to recognize the trust and relationships that are built. And what I don't know, open questions are, as people come into communities, I mean, there's a notion of permaculture zones when it comes to social permaculture. And what does it mean to be adopted by a community? What are the stages? How do you become a member? And then to what extent is that swappable? I mean, does it mean you go and visit other communities? Does it, what are the kind of exchanges that are possible? And what does it mean to move from one community to another community? And how easy is that to do as well? So these are open questions for design when it comes to a federation of regenerative neighborhoods. And I think this is something we should dive into to some extent, but it probably starts with something very simple. And that is, as young people, we'd like to enable young people to do a rural restart and to move out of the suburban, bankruptcies that are happening and move into a rural regeneration. And of course, that's the model for growth. So when we have abundant energy, abundant food, hopefully abundant housing, and also abundant labor, we can invite people that are interested, right, that want to do a restart to join the communities. And that's, of course, our exponential growth model. And then the question becomes, we should design the narratives for what it means to have land tenure. What does it mean to have succession? I think the old feudal landlord thing is a thing of the past. And what we need to do instead is talk about community engagement. And there's so much rural land everywhere, from the US to Australia to all over. And population of anything is probably going to stabilize or drop. And so it becomes more a question of, how do we do ecologically sustainable design and development? We have some examples in California and elsewhere. And then how do we develop a continuity? And if actually, I'm going to quote Samantha Sweetwater in her wonderful new book that just came out in November. And it's about True Human is what it's called. And she has something in the preface. You can read the preface for free on Amazon. And it's something about, there are four things we need to curate. And it's like land stewardship and all the rest. But continuity was one of them. And what I realized is we need that continuity across the years and across the generations. And that's an opportunity for us to design in. I don't think it's complete yet. But, does it mean that if people build sweat equity over time, then they get a right to their place in the sun as part of that community? And that's the simple version. And then later we can figure out, okay, how do people exchange communities over time, and sort that out? And I've seen some examples like Crystal Waters where people own their individual houses and even a little bit of land, just a tiny bit of land around the house, right? And then you've got community. Most of it is community property and resources, but that their houses, which can be bought and sold, are embedded within the community. And that seems to work to some extent. I've seen another model at Belbunya where the land is all tenants in common. You get a 49-year lease to build a cabin, and the cabin is yours. And you have the option to renew the lease after 49 years. So there's interest variations on that theme. We should compare all of those. And
this is the stewardship model, right? You're buying, you're getting access to the land.
Exactly.
Not owning this land, it's not yours. You have access to it based on whatever agreements. Yeah.
And I'll be dead in a few decades anyway, so I'm not sure I need to own it, or I don't have anybody I've got to will it to. It's got to be a different succession model.
And there's an interesting recurring theme with people being like, oh, I'm working for my kids, I'm hoarding wealth so I can leave something for my kids. But does that story change when your kids are going to have all of their core needs met?
Yeah.
Do you still I'm going through this with my dad right now. My dad is 65 and he's been about to retire for 4 years. And he just tells himself, oh, I'm working hard so I can leave you guys money. And okay, great. That's beautiful. It's going to be nice to, get some money when you die. And is that a story he's telling himself to keep himself safe? Is that, there's a whole I know for a fact,
living for death instead of living for life.
Yeah.
It's
right.
I got to tell you, I have some in-laws that were in their 90s, and they're spending $20,000 a month in an old folks home, and they don't see their family that often. Whereas if we build these regenerative communities and, these become the elders of the community, then this is just part of the services, right? It's part of the community. And so I think there needs to be a return to rationality when it comes to multi-generational communities.
Get rid of the elders, put them in a home somewhere. They're a problem. now that I'm not quite as brown as I used to be. I'm going.
Well, what I'm excited about is that I think it's going to be 10 or 100 times cheaper to do the activities of daily living with your robot assistants in 10 or 20 years. So we got a whole revolution happening, right? Where the messy jobs get handled by the robots, and we still have the community love, right? And it's like, and we just had one of our in-laws pass away, so we're gonna have a funeral and a celebration of life. But I tell you, we got a chance to see him last year, and he was right there, 95, and just wonderful. And that the minutes that we had, the short time that we had to talk with him and to visit, it built community and service, and it added meaning to our lives and his. So I gotta say, let's
we got to bring that back. Allow that wisdom in the elderhood.
The grandparents and the children
on porn bots for us older guys.
Exactly, grandparents and children. So let's hope that we can design that into part of Regen neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, so we're definitely working on this, you guys. I'm like super grateful for these calls. You've left so much like on my plate right now. I have like 8 open tabs now on my on my LLMs that I'm now going to be processing to like.
Well, now we're dealing with how to learn, right?
Yeah,
and that's got to be a huge question. What is the matrix for learning? And so far, our society has kind of lost the ability to transfer knowledge well. And so it's a huge topic. It needs to be on our list of 624,000 other things that you're adding, Oscar. But
yeah, sure. And remember, again, the point of these calls is to gather these topics, right? We have like all of the things that are important to us as this macro database, which in the past was exhausting to me to think that I'm doing a call to add more homework that I'm probably never going to get through. But now with the LLMs, I feel much more confident. And like, even just seeing, I'm like less antsy about getting stuff on the board because all of the transcripts are coming through and it's working pretty well uploading the transcripts. And I'm seeing how it affects the input from the LLM. So I'm grateful for these conversations. Vic, I think the open space combo is like, again, in the beginning, I was really antsy about getting it on the board because I'm better at processing textual stuff. But now with the LLMs and processing the calls and the scripts, I'm feeling so much more confident about having these really beautiful conversations. And I think my result will be us taking on little projects, maybe after the calls and we've brought up all the topics. For example, I'd like to do a call where I go, okay, for this next 2 hours or whatever it is, we're going to focus on outlining how the governance for our group should work and seeing what we end up with.
I disagree with that approach. I'm not a fan of putting governance this early, but I have a whole proposal on that one. So
okay, I'd love to see it. Right, that was just an example. Right, another one like what's an economic system that we like. This question I had of like how do we find
categories?
Right? Yes. Yeah, right. And so maybe that'll be the next experiment where we're like, actually now experiment of, okay, we have the concept of the framework. We know what we have to build. Let's like exactly how Thomas made the potentialism documentation.
Well, again, Ian and I are developing a profiling system to initiate the dynamics of the interaction between people who show up, not what they're supposed to fall into in terms of the silos, but what they have to generate. And that's a completely inverted model. We now have the ability to do it, but it's complex. So, we need help.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea of doing sprints, and I'm just thinking, maybe what we do is we identify our best practices that we can figure out in each of these categories and create some like a month-long session, right? Like let's do a Regen neighborhood for a month. Let's do a Regen neighborhood for a quarter or a year.
Replace the April event with this virtual event, kind of,
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, you could gamify it as well. But I actually, one of the reasons we're boots on the ground and fins in the water is we're working with real Regen communities up and down the coast of Australia and, some in the US and thinking broader. And, it's like, let's figure out what's working, what isn't. They've already got some good bones in place, but there's some significant gaps in different places. And this is where we can help to fill in with the DNA. Regen neighborhood DNA is what I'm hoping we're building.
Right. This is the goal, right? Right now we're just getting like the topics of what is in the DNA. And
Exactly.
then the next iteration will be to start figuring out the AGTCs.
All the codes that'll do it.
Cool, you guys. Yeah, I'm grateful for your like consistency, participation. I hope you guys are enjoying the talks.
Definitely.
They're definitely taking a more open, kind of conversational pattern now that I have a track on taking the data, getting it in, and putting it up. My next step in the framework journey is putting everything in a public space. Everything is hiding on my computer right now. And I've been doing my best at uploading the most finished documents to a Google Doc so people can at least look through the documents that we've been working with and preparing. I'd like it to be a little more like real time, where like everything is just getting saved and you're seeing the branches of conversations to finished results. I think with Ian, we're going to brainstorm on what that looks like. And what that can turn out to be. I'm like swamped by data right now. I have documents and documents open all over the place and tabs and stuff. So we're here for it, you guys. I'm like really enjoying all of this.
Cool. Well, I just want to share that a week from now, I may be up in San Francisco. There's this Solarpunk Unconference, which is like a whole bunch of people getting together for the weekend and kind of figuring out, all right, what are we going to do with Solarpunk? For me, it's all about stellar, solar, about an energy and all the rest. And so I may be in person on that thing. So next week, I'm not sure, but I wanted to let you guys know in case anybody's in the Bay Area or wants to head over there. I may actually drive up from LA for this thing.
Nice.
So
we have a friend that's there now. We'll share it with him.
Okay. Yeah, so it's kind of a solar punk movement. So I'm looking forward to
maybe you meet some cool people there and you're like, hey, we're doing these calls where we're building this framework. Here's the current version. I'm gonna make a little soft page of like, right, the current web landing page we have is like all of the information. I want to make a page with like the actual framework product and what's coming up so far. Like
you know what'd be cool? What'd be really cool is if we made a big poster, I could get my friends to put it up at the solar punk thing, and that would just be for like regen neighborhoods and some kind of like a curated Miro board, if you will, of everything we've done the last few weeks, so that regen neighborhoods and even Masterminding Eden gets on the radar for this whole community.
Yeah, totally.
That'd be awesome. So I'm happy to kind of coordinate that. If you guys can work on the content, I'll try to make sure, we could get a poster printed or put up there or something, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Sweet. Yeah. Well, Sonia's a talented graphic designer.
Thank you, Sonia. Super.
Yeah, she's been making all the collage work and all the stuff.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's so exciting.
Human touch that still comes from the graphics.
Yeah, my guess is I could have it printed at a FedEx somewhere nearby and get it up there. Cool.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Cool. And they're going to do a bunch of unconference events
for the winter. I'll see you all soon.
Okay, thanks, Vic.
Peace, guys. Much love.
Yeah. Happy Saturday, you guys.
Yeah, take care. Great to see
you. We'll talk soon.
And Oscar, are you and Sonia in Colombia?
Yeah, we're in Colombia.
I heard that they're using Bitcoin for a lot of things.
I haven't seen any crypto here in the town where we are.
Right.
In a super remote area.
But we're like super remote. We're like up in the mountain of Santa Marta, like the Sierra Nevada.
Cool.
But in Bogota and Medellin, in some places you can definitely find cryptocurrency accepted as a payment.
Yeah.
Good to know. That's good to know. Yeah. And then are you in a community actually? And I'm wondering how it's going.
So we have some friends that are here working on a bioregional mapping project.
Nice.
And they have rented a house and they're forming a community. They're all living together. And the goal of their community is to do this bioregional work, mapping and supporting local projects.
Okay.
So we've been supporting them in like how they're organizing themselves. Because, it's really challenging to do. They're doing two projects at the same time. They're like figuring out the community thing, which is challenging. And they're also figuring out the logistics of this bioregional mapping project.
Great. Well, 2 points on this. One is one of the team members that I just met this week at the Regen Currency Federation. She's in Colombia and she's working on she works with World Bank and all sorts of things, but she's like a super expert on on some of the currency work. And so I'd love to introduce you to her. And the second is I've known Joshua Prieto for years, better part of a decade, as part of the Global Regen Collab. And that's the Global Regenerative Collaboratory. It's mostly online. Yeah. And Joshua and his family, I think, are in Colombia as well. So at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if your circles cross, but I'm happy to make a couple of warm introductions.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. That'd be lovely. Yeah, it's just, great to ask a few questions. The people in the country that know, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's all about network weaving and a couple of expats who I think could be helpful.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for offering.
Hey, Brian, do you have a link to that solar panel conference or whatever?
Yeah, I think it's in the chat right now. It's under Eventbrite, and the agenda should be on there.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah, and then they've got a little video. It's going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday in a week's time. And let me know if you're heading up there. I'm still trying to confirm plans. But who was asking? Is it Eric?
Oh, yeah, it's Eric here. Yeah, I just I can't make it, but I could send the link to my aunt and just for gas and giggles, but that's about it.
Oh yeah, no, that's cool. And we'll check it out. And if I'm not available next week, you'll know I'll be at the SolarPunk conference.
Right on.
Cool. That's exciting. So anyway, we'll line it up and look forward to getting the word out there for Regen neighborhoods. I think it's highly synergistic.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, the more, people that are like passionate about this, there's just so many people doing it in silos. So it's cool to like come together, share these topics, set some goals, right? The framework is this first goal, this template. We're going to put a wrapper around this text document to make it like a little more useful kind of like guide. This is, Ian's excited about this. We have 2 documents, right? We could do it for the alchemy guide and then also for the framework as like an implementation tool. And then first a planning tool and then an implementation tool.
That's right.
And so this will be this kind of, and then with that implementation tool, there's still going to be a lot to figure out of like, well, what economic system do you want? And that like, I really see this as like a framework for each of the subcategories.
Yeah.
And those frameworks all together being executed, guided by the macro framework of the full neighborhood. I am right. I just see it as like hold-ons of each other.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I think that's for sure our first sprint. Thank you guys for like your diligence and showing up. It makes me excited and confident, that there's more of us. Let's keep it going. It's pretty lively in the Telegram, Dr. Brian, on the tech side and a lot of stuff. So whenever you're in there, maybe add it to one of your like folders and pop it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you, Sonia. I'll check out the tower and see what we can line up, and I'll make some inquiries about doing, having presence at the unconference at the SolarPunk, and see, and I'll look forward to it. So let's plan on it, and I'll be in touch in the days ahead.
Sweet. Yeah, we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
All right,
Good weekend, everybody. Bye.
Yeah. Thomas, thank you for presenting today. Right, your take on potentialism has like kept me super engaged. It's been like a really good clay to add and like practice with the framework and all that. I'd like to have another call about it maybe this week. This last week was kind of crazy for us, like electricity stuff here in town and just general things. Ian, we have a lot to chat about, dude. I'm like pumped up about how excited you are.
Yeah, I got 2 requests before I jump off. Oscar, I gotta go and have something to eat. But if you could kick out that Genesis bot and then invite it back in was the first request.
I'll do it again.
The second one was send me the link. Yeah, send me the link to the alchemy guide, just because I'm quite motivated to work on that as a good demonstration.
Yeah, I'll send you the direct link to the Google Doc that we have that is like multiple tabs. That's where like the book is.
Perfect.
Okay, sweet. I'll send you that.
Thanks, Oscar.
Yeah,
I'll be on the chat.
We got a lot. We'll chat more. Yeah, you're way earlier than us, right? It's like morning time for you.
Yeah. We're just going on to 1 p.m.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, we're gonna go have like food as well, and I'll shoot you a message. Let's check in a little bit.
Yep. Awesome.
Okay, cool,
thanks,
man.
guys.
Enjoy lunch.
Take care, everyone. See you next time.
Yeah.
Peace out, Thomas. Bye. Peace out, Eric. Laters.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye, you guys.
Later, my dudes.
Thomas, good job today. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I would like to work with you a little bit on like the like your like a pitch competition. So like you can like, because you gave a good hook. I think one thing, because you've been able to explain it to me on multiple calls, I get it. It's like hard to take a big idea into 1 or 4 sentences.
Yes.
I would like to rehearse that with you a little more, because it's really good. It's like maybe there's one slide on there that can be like the best summarized version of, like, you explain why the system doesn't work, maybe the defining more the key components of what makes potentialism, right? Like the MBV thing, that's important. Limiting corruption, that's important. Yeah. I get it. I feel like I understand it now because we spent a few calls explaining it to me. And I guess my goal as an entrepreneur is always to like take a good idea and put it into like a punchline that people understand in a few sentences. So maybe we can work on that this week a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for presenting. I'm grateful for it. And again, thank you for all the work you've done on that. It like fills a lot of gaps in my economy mind of that I haven't put enough energy into.
Yeah, the entire system is gamed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We have to ungame it.
Sure, exactly. All right, Tom. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
We'll chat soon. Bye.